Excuse me.
Councillor Raffel as well is not here, just as a heads up, Chair.
Okay, I think we just wait. There we go. Councillor Carruthers. Councillor Raffel. Okay, I will start. Okay, so just for everybody, I'm Councillor Stuart Frost, the Chair of Economic Planning and Housing, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the meeting of the 1st of July, which is being held virtually and in accordance with the Council's rules for virtual meetings, which reflect the published government regulations. The meeting is being streamed live on YouTube and will also be available to view after the meeting has finished. Councillors who sit on this committee are identified by name on the screen, and I will introduce the officers by name before they address the committee. Councillors are reminded that although this meeting is being held remotely, they are regarded as being present in a meeting of the council, and they should observe the normal rules of behaviour under the Member Code of Conduct and not allow members of their household to distract them during the course of the meeting. Please can members ensure that their mobile phones are now switched off or on silent, and members of the committee will turn on their video link during the meeting and keep their microphones muted unless they have been invited to speak by myself as chair. Members are reminded that if they switch off their video link or move away from the camera, they'll be treated as leaving the meeting and will not be able to take part in any vote taken on the item under discussion. Members can indicate their wish to speak by raising their hand electronically and should only speak when I, as chair, invite them to do so. Officers present will only switch on their video link during the item that they are presenting, or where they wish to be invited to speak by me as chair. As chair, I'll confirm the name of any visiting speaker at the appropriate time in the agenda who will address the committee by audio link. Councillors should declare that they are leaving the meeting and switch off their video link if they have a disclosable pecuniary interest or other personal interest in an item on the agenda. The councillors can switch on their video link when I call the next agenda item. Voting will be taken by a roll call, and I'll confirm the recommendation proposed to the committee before voting begins. Can each member indicate whether they are for or against the recommendation or whether they wish to abstain? Hopefully, we won't have any IT problems, okay, but can I remind councillors that if their connection is lost, they should immediately advise the Democratic Services Support Officer and use their meeting link to re-access the meeting again. Thank you. Okay, so just moving through very quickly, okay, to the agenda. Okay, and agenda item 1, apologies for absence and substitutions. We have a couple. Okay, the first one, apologies from Councillor Vaux, who is being substituted by Councillor Paul Miller. And then we have Councillor Laura Jane has sent her apologies, and she's been subbed by Councillor Harvey. We also have apologies from Councillor Peter. So there we go, with no substitution. So moving on, are there any other apologies, okay, that anybody is aware of? Sadie?
No, but Councillor Mahaffey is not here yet.
Right, okay, so I know he is having trouble with his internet, okay, so he'll probably pop in. He has been resent the invite, okay, and we'll get it from there. So so there we go. Okay, so declarations of interest, item number 2. Does anybody have a declaration of interest? No. Okay, that's great. Okay, please be reminded that you can make a declaration of interest at any time during the meeting, should you be aware that there is a pecuniary interest in there. Okay, number 3, urgent matters. Okay, there is one urgent matter, and that's to basically introduce the. Hello, Simon. How are you? We've got Simon Mahaffey joining us now. Fantastic. Okay, great. Okay, so we're on to urgent matters. Okay, so sadly, unfortunately, the report wasn't available to in item 5. Okay, the green infrastructure strategy, the mid-year summary wasn't available to be sent out with the agenda. So I'd like to bring that in under urgent matters, and we will discuss this at the proper place. So I just wanted to refer to that under urgent matters. Okay, so moving on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of June. Okay, what I'd like to do is I'd like to move that the minutes of the meeting be signed as a correct record. Okay, does anybody have any issues with that? Councillor Watts, are you raising your hand, or was that just scratching? Okay, no, great. Okay, okay. So if anybody hasn't got in any amendments to the meeting, then I move that the meetings of the minutes of the 10th of June, okay, be signed as a correct record. Is there a seconder? Councillor Conesco. Okay. That's fantastic. We'll get those done. Okay. Then moving on to item number 5, okay, which is the green infrastructure strategy. We do actually have a public speaker, okay. Councillor Raffel, do you want to introduce the paper before the public speaker or after?
I'd like to introduce the paper, and then I'd like to comment after the public speaker, if you let me. Sure. So first of all, can I say welcome to everyone. It's good to be back with you all and working with you moving forwards. You may recall that back in December, what was attempted by the officers and myself was to give you an annual report, and quite properly the committee said, well, hold on, you may, these are my words, you may have been doing some good things, but the green infrastructure strategy said you should be doing some other things, and you need to look at that again. And so chastened by that and requested by you to come back at a 6-month point, we are now here. So we're hoping that you'll think that we have listened to you and attempted to deal with matters properly in relation to the strategy. And clearly there's always more that can be done. And so this is a conversation going back and forth where we will listen to what you've got to say and adjust things accordingly, and then look forward to letting you know how things are moved on in due course. So that's really where we are, and that's why we're here. And for new members, of course, they weren't present at that experience in December, and so they will be a good opportunity for them to get up to speed tonight, and for the older members, be a good opportunity for them to say whether we've started to address matters appropriately. There's clearly going to be some discussion on whether things should be green, amber or red, and I've certainly moved things in our discussions. I don't think the officers of mind. I've moved some away from red and some into red, actually, where I didn't think things were being achieved. There's no point in putting a nice varnish on something if it's just not there in the first place. And so maybe we'll thresh out some things, and we're relaxed enough to say if we've got the categorization, because it's very subjective anyway, wrong, then I'm sure we'll make some adjustments, because there's no point in ducking it. And if we did ignore what you say, you'd carry on mentioning it. So, because we share the same objectives. Anyway, that's enough from me. Let's see what our visiting speaker is going to say, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Rafael. Okay, Andy Canesco and Sadie. Andy, have you got your timer ready? And Sadie, have we got our visiting speaker?
Looks like the visiting speaker is on the line, and yes, I do have my timer ready. Lucy, good evening, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. You've got 2 minutes in which to speak. I'll let you know when there's 30 seconds of your time remaining, and feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Hi, my name's Lucy Clahessy-Jones. I have been in Basingstoke for nearly 5 years, but with hands forward 3 children under 5. I'm a journalist for BBC, Telegraph, Times and Guardian, and the author of Losing Eden, which is a book about nature and mental health, which I've been studying for the last 8 years or so. The Green Infrastructure Strategy and media summary does not match the urgency required by the current situation we're in. The House of Commons Environmental Audit Committee published a report this week on biodiversity and called for urgent transformative change. Quote, "To prevent biodiversity collapse becoming a global crisis, action must be taken now." As we all know, all wards in Basingstoke town, where I live, I'm on Kingsclear Road, except Kempshott, fall below standard for green space, and the town is extremely nature depleted, just as our country is. I'm concerned as a mother of the next generation that the council and strategy is not taking biodiversity collapse seriously and good progress is not being made. The BIS pilot is commendable in itself, but why are we waiting to enhance nature everywhere? The B-line aim is marked green, but there is no sign of tangible action being taken. Bulb planting along Churchill Way is beautiful, but hardly species rich. Areas have been mown recently that were filled with insects, food for birds, bats and mammals, sites of mental health and well-being and play for children at a very difficult time for many.
30 seconds.
We need more local nature reserves. We need mowing only where appropriate. We need to facilitate greater local action to protect and improve nature, as the local plan says, by scrapping the controlling top-heavy approach, which scuppers volunteering. We need to make the link between biodiversity and mental health and well-being. There is little place for mown lawns in the current crisis. And as the report says, time is running out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. Can I ask Councillor Rafael to come back?
Well, can I thank Lucy Clahessy-Jones for her contribution? I'm obviously aware that the matter in Kingsclear, I think it's Kingsclear or a field associated with Kingsclear, caused her and others a lot of upset. She probably is aware. I'm not responsible for mowing, but I am responsible for trying to stop mowing sometimes. And so it's entirely appropriate that she's raised that as one of the many things that she is talking about. I share her concern. We may have different ways of approaching it, or we may share that approach, but I share her concern that the natural environment that we live in has been taken for granted and abused for generations around Basingstoke. And we are all too slow in coming to this debate. I have started the process, and I think most members across all parties will recognise that I have started the process, but I fully accept that it's not a standstill situation. It's a moving objective. The reason I came up with the BIS, and bear in mind it wasn't something I copied from somewhere else, it was my own idea. The reason I came up with the BIS was because I recognised that species in the semi-ermid environment of Hatch Warren were going to die out. And they were going to die out for a combination of reasons, partly the mowing regime, partly because as development around Hatch Warren was increased, bear in mind it's cut off to the south by the M3 and was potentially going to be cut off to the north and west. If we didn't do something to create natural environment corridors and to protect and enhance that which was already still there and has survived the development, then we could never replace it. And the BIS was successful. It was successful, and it passed without any concern whatsoever from the residents there. And indeed, neighbouring councillors of in neighbouring wards of all political parties have been openly discussing with me about expanding the BIS. And everything was absolutely good until the Gazette got involved. And Megan at the Gazette wrote an article that linked the long grass across the borough, which many people have been concerned about because of the rain in May and when it was going to be cut, and the BIS. And she linked the two and effectively said, the reason the grass is long across the borough is because the borough is growing the grass because of biodiversity improvement zones. And since then, the council has been inundated with complaints saying, we don't want a BIS here, we don't want a BIS there. Now, I'm afraid that level of stupidity in the press, when I wasn't contacted for a reply, I knew full well when I read it, because it had already gone out, of the mayhem it would cause, the misunderstanding and the consequences. And now it makes it harder for us to achieve what was universally being accepted across political parties and amongst residents of people of no politics whatsoever, that this was a good thing to do, provided we do it carefully. We observe sightlines at junctions. We find areas where the residents think that it's a good idea that it happens. We communicate it with local community groups. We discuss it with schools, and we proceed carefully. And everyone understands it's nothing to do with the general cutting of grass, which will still continue around it to make footpaths clear and all the rest of it. And the whole process has been turned into a complete turmoil because of the stupidity of the Basingstoke Gazette. And I'm afraid, if you're on the receiving end of all of that, and you've got councillors who, none of you, as far as I'm aware, in front of us, but other councillors jumping on the bandwagon every time people say, oh, well, the long grass is due to the council's experiment with biodiversity, and then telling members of the public to complain to the council about it, you can understand where suddenly we've moved from being in a, this is great, this is what we wanted, this was new, it was working. Let's carefully and consider introducing it to other areas around Basingstoke and Dean, which is exactly where we were prior to the wet weather in May, exactly where we were. And I've spoken to some of the councillors who are in front of us today saying, I'm on board, let's make it happen. It doesn't happen overnight because we've got to do the consultation. It doesn't happen straight away because there is a cost implication, because it costs the council more to do it. So we have to work out, are we going to change our budget altogether across the council, or are we going to do it incrementally and suck it up progressively? Now, I know if you're passionate about biodiversity, you say, crack on, do it now. But we've got to take the public with us. And so we've had this massive kick in the proverbials by the Gazette, and then we've got to suck up the consequences. The council's got to get on and do with its mowing where it's got to do its mowing, so the public realise that that side of its service is back up to where it should be. And then we've got to get this debate going again in the urban environment and in the rural environment around the borough. So I fully accept that, and I fully accept that beelines are very important. The beeline project has outlined 3 major areas for beelines across the borough. 2 of which are right at the top of my list. I remember where they were. They are from Whitchurch down to Heriot, and another one that's going across from Sherburn St John, I think, towards Silchester. It could be the 3rd one is down the Loddon Valley, but I can't remember. But they are so important, and they seem to me to be part of a building block of us protecting areas across our borough from significant development going forwards. Because otherwise, if we don't move forward and seek that protection, it will be gone. So it's a long way of saying thank you to the speaker, but I've had this pent up unhappiness, that's a nice way of putting it, with what has gone on. And I wanted to share it with members to think that I'm no less passionate about us all moving forward with the things that we were doing. And we've just got to carefully explain to our residents that the Gazette, coupled with some stupid other people, have deliberately muddled all this up. And the rest of us in our wards in Brighton Hill, where the councillors have been very supportive of this idea, and Kempshott initially, and there are some others. And I know, I think in Brookvale, Kings Furlong, or whatever it's called now, because I know all names have changed, and that we will actively be doing it. And I know that one or two of you know that I'm actively got a meeting penciled in for you. We keep changing the date because of my problems, but we're going to meet with you to sort this out. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Raffel. I think members around will agree with me that we share your frustration. Okay, Councillor Harvey, did you have a question to?
I did. Can I ask a question of Lucy, if that's okay? Well, or has she gone? And Lucy's still there. Lucy's with us. Lucy, could you share with us? I mean, I think it would be useful for councillors to hear just, what happened in Lancaster Road area, really, because I think as an example of what you've done and worked on, and an example of what happened, it maybe reflects some of the frustrations we need to understand. Can I ask you to share that with us all, if that's okay?
Yeah, sure. So early last year, I started being in correspondence with Councillor Laura James, and me and my neighbours, we have this kind of vacant open space behind Lancaster Road, which has always been quite tightly mown kind of recreation space. It's very out of the way, and we thought it would be a good space to regenerate and restore for nature and for biodiversity. And we worked with Gordon, and he offered us some bulbs and some trees which have been planted, and he agreed that we could leave kind of 2/3 of it unmown to see what would come up and what species would come up. And we thought that perhaps it would just be kind of standard ryegrass. It's in the middle of town, it's very urban. I was advised by Gordon that the soil was probably quite bad quality. There might not be much biodiversity there. However, come 3 weeks ago, it was like a prairie meadow. I would go out there in the evenings and do a kind of ecological survey and come back with multiple species of plant and flower and insect. You'd walk past it and crickets and grasshoppers would kind of burst through the grasses. It was incredible. We would sit out there, me and my neighbours, and feel extremely restored and relaxed. Living in quite an urban space in Kingsclear Road. Norden is very kind of under provision of open space. We have the Holy Ghost Cemetery, which is lovely, but it's quite a hard nature depleted ward. And my children, my 4-year-olds, would walk through it and kind of fall in love with the different plants and the insects, and we'd go looking for beetles and so on. So when the mowers arrived, it was a bit confusing and frankly quite heartbreaking and devastating for us. I don't know if any of you have heard this phrase, solastalgia. It's a word coined by an Australian farmer, and it means kind of solace, nostalgia for a place that's given you solace which has been destroyed. I really felt that about this tiny little pocket of land which we'd really grown to love and to nurture. I tried to stop the mowers. I said, Gordon's given us permission, please can you stop? They said they would, but then they made a call, and Matt, I think, who's Gordon's deputy, told them to continue. He hadn't got the message. There was obviously a miscommunication issue. And we've sorted it out, and Gordon is giving us a bit more kind of permission on that land. But what it really showed me, and I think was really illuminating, is that in these small pockets of space, within a few months, it was filled with biodiversity. And I know it says in the report that measuring biodiversity success is a long-term thing. That's true up to a point. The number of species was amazing, and the effect on the community and the residents was amazing too. The evidence base, which I've been studying for almost a decade for nature and mental health, and particularly biodiverse spaces and mental health, which people understand if they live outside the town, but in the centre of town, we don't have much biodiversity. And we now know the science has proven that it's very important for people's kind of stress recovery and their mental health and well-being to be around biodiverse spaces. And so it was quite amazing how quickly that kind of came up. Matt, in his email to Laura, said that, just as you have explained, Councillor, that there'd been lots of complaints about the mowing. So the impression I got was that they were responding to those complaints, and there was a miscommunication issue. But it was pretty heartbreaking to see that level of destruction, which I've seen a bit more of and I didn't really know what to say to my children. They love the space, and it just doesn't make sense in this current crisis we're in to act like that.
Thank you, Lucy. Okay, if I'm going to ask you to very quickly wind up, okay, and answer questions, and then we will move on. Does anybody else have any more questions? No?
Chairman, can I just say I'm very happy to meet either with the ward councillors and or Lucy Clersey-Jones at the location. I've just got it up on Google Satellites, and discuss what they think should be achieved there to improve biodiversity as a great open space for local people. I can see where it is. It's a lovely little cul-de-sac with a car park attached to it. And I'm very happy to meet with them. And if perhaps Councillor Harvey can be the conduit for that, if he wants to be, and we can, he can email me after.
I'll happily help with that, Mark. I'm very happy to help with that. With
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the report that's in front of the committee tonight on green infrastructure strategy. Mark, would you like to introduce it, please?
Well, I've sort of introduced it. What I think I'll do is ask Tom Payne, because he is standing in for a number of different people. I think we might have Chris. Yes, we've got Chris Slack.
Yes, we do.
Who's listening in as well. So if they need some sort of hands-on, this is what it's really like on the ground, Chris will come in. But I think Tom will introduce it and talk us through the way it interrelates with the priorities. I think you've got to turn it on its side if you've got the hard copy. It's in landscape, and you'll see the strategic aims are set out below, right at the bottom. So you've got to keep flicking down to them, and so it's been written very much with that in mind. And trying to see, look, have we really addressed these? And so very happy for, if you want to, Chairman, take it by box, if you know what I mean, as in each section. So the first one being 1A, 1B, 29, strategies and policies. There is obviously going to be some overlap. So it might be that you'll get the answer, well, I think that's in the box further down. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be in the box you're suggesting it is. And likewise, but give it critical scrutiny. I mean, we need to lift our standards on this. So I feel overall, even though I will say the officers are trying blooming hard to make sure it happens too. Okay,
sure.
Tom.
Okay, Tom.
Good evening, committee members. So yeah, just as Councillor Raphael reflected at the beginning, what we've done effectively is try to respond to the comments that were made at the last committee meeting. When the annual update was discussed, I think it was January, and obviously members asked that it was presented in a different way so that you could actually see how well we are progressing against the actions within the green infrastructure strategy. So what you've effectively got there is that the table itself is really a direct extract from the GI strategy. So that's directly out of that. And what we've added is two new columns. The two new columns are the progress, so a RAG rating, green, amber, or red, and obviously a commentary in terms of comments, just to give an indication of the areas of work that we've either achieved or are in progress. So that's the way. Obviously keen, as Councillor Raphael's mentioned already, just to get members' feedback in terms of the format of this. Does that is this the way that members feel is most appropriate in order to give you the update in the most appropriate way? What we've also done, again, it's part of the annual update report, is link this to Appendix 1, where we've got a table, again, another table, but basically it shows a lot of the activity, the day-to-day activity that the team are involved in, which covers a huge variety of different things. When you think about all of the tree inspections that are undertaken and the tree works that we do, planning consultations, delivery of play area improvements, new local nature reserves, etc., etc. When you look through the amount of activity, hopefully you'll agree that there is a huge amount that the council is doing in support of this particular priority. So I'm happy to take you through it. I mean, personally, I was just going to hand it over for questions, or If you want to go through it on a section by section basis, we can do that.
I think a section by section basis would be helpful. Okay. Certainly from my perspective, and I think I'll kind of kick it all off. Okay. In the progress column, okay, the green, amber, and red. I find the green quite confusing because we use this in the AMR to actually say that something's been done. Okay. So I'm quite happy if you want to use the green, okay, to say that it's on track, but can we put on track in there in the progress as well? Because to me, it looks like the first two boxes, both being green, have been done, and we're happy with the outcomes in there. Where in reality, looking at the timescales, okay, they're obviously on box one. It depends on the review dates of the existing strategies, and the second box is 0 to 2 years. Okay, so I know they're in progress, but it's kind of confusing to me to see green there because I think it's actually been completed and it hasn't. So I'm happy to have the green there, but just in that green box, can we say on track rather than just leave it empty? And then I'll throw it out to anybody else. Has anybody else got any questions on there? Okay, Councillor Miller.
Along the same lines, thank you, Chair. Along the same lines, RAG is actually used in the way that the Chairman's just enumerated. Now, the timescale depend on the review of existing strategies. We can put timescales in there because if you look at the strategies, they're linked to the next local plan. A lot of these, that's where our policies come from. With something like the Green Infrastructure Strategy that's linked to the local plan, because they address the whole concept of whatever the local plan is. Now we've got those dates. I believe we've got to start thinking about submitting the local plan spring 2023, if my memory serves, after all the consultations before it goes to the inspector for ratification. So dates can actually appear. And I think that would be more realistic. Quite agree with the Chairman. Progress is going on, it's on track. I'm not asking for a project timeline here, but for the purposes of this kind of scrutiny within the committee, I think this is more than adequate. As long as the annotation is there, I think that would be a great improvement. And on a general question right up front, I keep seeing a reference throughout the whole document to a GI database. Now, is the database, presumably that's the collation of all the various elements and from which this report is distilled. I'm making an assumption there, because if it's a progress database, is it accessible to members? That's my first question, because without having access to write, if it could be a read access to that database, that would be a very helpful thing, certainly for me, getting an overall picture of what's going on. And I think it would save an awful lot of explanation to maybe 54 councillors that are going on around the place. But a quick viewing, read-only type of access. I don't know what kind of database it is. If it's a database, it's going to be probably access. I don't know what you're using them for. It might be a bespoke database, but normally you can have read access to that database. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Tom, would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so the CMSI database, I think, hopefully I got the abbreviation right. Yeah, it's to capture all of the activity that sits below management plans for particular open spaces. So there's routine activities, there's schedule activities that should be happening, in order to enhance biodiversity, those sorts of things. So it's about scheduling, really. That's the main purpose of it. It's so that we can pull off reports for operatives and for volunteer groups and so on to show exactly what the program is, if you like, for particular open spaces in terms of that sort of routine activity. And so we've got a way of tracking it and monitoring progress. So that's the real purpose of it. I'm quite happy that we could bring, as part of the next annual update, for members, we can give you an insight into what that looks like. So more than happy to share that.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Rafael, you had, before obviously Tom takes us through the rest of the document, okay, box by box, you had your hand up.
Yes, well, it was just the 2 points. One is that there's a difference between the local plan policies and these strategies, and some of these things are reviewed every 5 years, and that's what it's really basically saying, timescales dependent on review date. And it was making the point that the tree strategy is being reviewed this year, and some of the other strategies have been reviewed over the previous years. But obviously we take the point that's being made. In terms of the green infrastructure database, the question that Councillor Miller was asking was, is that accessible to everyone? And perhaps we could have the answer from Tom about that, because I'm very keen that it should be.
It's not accessible to everybody, but again, it's something I can explore as with officers. Yeah, it's a question I will have to take away, I think, and ask.
Yeah.
Thank you.
About.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought the answer was. You see, Chairman, and it is part of what I want to achieve, and I'd like members to make it loud and clear. If that's their view, that certainly all councillors should be able to, if not all members of the public, should be able to get onto the borough's website and see what has been documented for the green infrastructure across the borough, so that they can make value judgments when planning and infrastructure decisions are coming along as to what is taking place. And also it should feed into our policies. If that's what members want, then they need to make that felt, make that clear.
I think that's absolutely vital. I'll come on to you in a minute, Councillor Harvey. I think that's absolutely vital. I think we need to have access to this database, okay, so that we can make informed decisions. I'm not exactly surprised, but obviously it seems to be almost a hidden database. I'm all for transparency here, okay, and making everything as transparent as we possibly can.
I can assure it's not no intention to be withholding anything from you. It's purely, as I say, a tool that we are using in the team to be able to bring together all of those actions that are within each individual management plan for our open spaces. Of course, there's loads of them. I think there's at least 17 management plans covering different open spaces, but into a format that we can clearly schedule it for the benefit of the operatives and other groups that are working on sites. So we know what's due in October, November, December, etc. So trying to bring that together. But
sure,
I'm very happy to share it.
Thank you.
Access in terms of remote access from all members, but in a format that's available.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I'm conscious of what the officers are doing, and it's not just in one particular area, this is cross-cutting, so I'm conscious of the amount of work that's going on, and I'm conscious of the difficulty in trying to communicate that in a report like this to members and have a focus, if you like, of the report with action. So when I link back to the strategy and I look at 1A, 1B and 29 as the paragraphs that are relevant to this, what I'm struggling with is trying to link, obviously using the RAG system, and I agree with the comments about the RAG. I think the idea of, green is it's been done, amber is it's in progress, we're not quite here, that red, there's a serious issue, it's flagged up for falling behind, it's a performance indicator in that way. But what I'm struggling with the commentary is perhaps relating some of it back. So perhaps what I'm asking for is for some more explicit reference to the actions that are in the strategy in the comments. So for example, paragraph 29, while it comes up later in the report, covers off relationships with the CCG and covers off relationships on health and green spaces. But it doesn't necessarily relate here to the comments that you're passing in this box, but yet you're highlighting the paragraph in the strategic aims. So I'm cross-referencing things, and they're not quite cross-referencing in the way they should in the report to tell me what the actions have been on that. And then 1A and 1B is fascinating because it also covers stuff around the AOMB. And it covers stuff around green infrastructure proposals to deal with roadside verges, field boundaries, woodland edges. It covers off landscape character assessments. Now that's in the strategy of what those paragraphs' strategic aims are. So to understand the actions column is to say, well, what are we doing about them? How far have you got on that? Now I know you can't tell us everything in voluminous detail, but I'm wondering if there's a way the report could be structured that would give some action-orientated points of on the AONB elements, this is where we've got to. On the landscape character elements, this is where we've got to. And I know you do the CCG a bit later on, but the same thing again, just so there's a sense of a more direct relationship between the strategy's aims in the actual strategy and the work that I know our officers are doing, which would be important. So that's a sense of conclusion that's cross-cutting across the lot, but it kind of stands out on this first one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Is there Tom? Do you want to come back on that?
No. So take that on board, and obviously this is all about refining the way that we present this. Obviously, what in the course of a normal annual update, there'll be the report itself, which will provide some narrative and some explanation of some of the projects that we've undertaken. Trying to distill that into a tabular format, exactly as you say. At best, it's a summary, and you want more detail. Again, with the annual update, we provided some appendices which went through things like the BIS in a lot more detail with photographs exactly showing what we're doing, Wigmore Heath, etc. It's all about trying to build this sort of big picture, isn't it, as to all the activity and present that in the most sort of cohesive way. So absolutely take on board what you've said, and it's useful for us to think about how we can, so to say, directly link the strategic objectives.
Great, thank you very much. Sorry to talk over you there. Councillor Konesko, you had your hand up.
I had, sorry, I've just lowered my hand. All I was going to say is, without wishing to labour the point, was I agree with the point that Paul's made. When I first looked at this report, I struggled a bit as well to link what I was seeing in the comment section with what the overall strategic objective was with that area. And I appreciate it's a challenge, because on the one hand, you want to provide as much information as possible. On the other, you clearly want to keep this brief, because it is a mid-year update, and you want it to be accessible for everyone, including members of the public. So it's the first time we've done it. It is a challenge, but I think if that's something that Tom and the team can take away and look at for next time, I think that would make a huge difference to the value that this report provides.
Okay, that's great. Okay, moving on to the second box. Tom, if you can just quickly explain that one, please. The second section. That's mapping and accounting.
All right, sorry, I was looking at the BIS. So we've kind of touched on this one, haven't we? In as far as the work that we're doing to update the database that we're using to track activity. We've talked about this point already. I may need assistance from my colleague Chris if he wishes to elaborate on some of the work around the natural capital accounting. He may well have more. We will have more detailed knowledge of that particular work stream than I do. But
great, Chris, do you want to put your video link on and also potentially unmute? That's great to see you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee members. Can you hear me at the moment?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yes, certainly concerning the natural capital accounting, what we're doing at the minute is having a look at the actual relevance of looking at a total package as in comparison to looking at individual themes such as climate change, such as another thing that's come online recently, which is nitrate influences into our chalk streams going down to the Solent. And what we're trying to figure at the minute is if we look at the individual streams on their own and give data on that, is it going to be more useful to the council in terms of making straightforward decisions on those particular important points, rather than looking at a total overall natural accounting package, which may give a overall view, but it may be too muddied to actually make independent decisions as to where priorities lie and where we need to action things going forward. Because the natural accounting element's been going on for 3 or 4 years now, but it seems to be being delivered on major cities, and also on things like the national parks and areas like this, where they're looking at the overall package. Whereas within Basingstoke and Dean, we have particular issues such as the nitrates issue on rivers and streams, such as climate change, whereby we've got individual policies now, and we're looking at trying to get specific data on those elements. Sorry, just looking at the other aspect within that element, looking at just the GI, public access to the GI information that's actually on the mapping sites at the moment. We've got due in progress at the minute with IT to actually put the local environmental network, which is the areas that could be put into better biodiversity use onto the actual public website. The other elements, such as key habitats, etc., that we've got with HBIC at the moment, that they basically provide that information to contractors and various people like that as a funding stream for HBIC itself. So that is where the issue lies with that specific information relating to things like key habitats and key species, because obviously contractors access that information for planning applications and such, and HBIC correlate that information and get it all together for us and the other local authorities in the county in terms of an administrative process. I think that's all I've got to say at the moment.
Okay, so I noticed that. Sorry, Andy, I'll come on to you in a minute. But if the committee will just indulge me, I noticed that is an amber. Okay, are we saying that that's fallen behind? Okay, or is that on track? I'm confused.
I think there's been a bit of delay with one particular element with the mapping, where we're doing the local ecological networks. That was primarily because the local ecological network goes across the whole of the county. It was developed by the local nature partnership, and so it was just getting some agreement that you know it could go out as a public kind of element.
Thank you, Councillor Konesko.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to go back up one box to the one that's in the project column's got B, development of GI management guidelines. We mentioned in the description bit at the end that the aim of here, one of the objectives is to produce guidelines setting out best practice in design, delivery and management of GI. And then in the comment section, we talk about the BIS projects, BIS pilots, which are obviously a critical part of that. And I was just interested to know from Tom or the team more broadly, if there's any additional work happening sort of outside of the BIS pilots in terms of producing these best practice guidelines for managing our GI areas.
Okay, Tom, Chris.
So shall I start with Chris, and Chris can join in if
sure.
to add to that. So, you know, obviously as part of the planning process, we've got guidelines within the supplementary planning guidance documents around our expectations about the management of land for biodiversity and achieving biodiversity net gain. So effectively that forms one part of some of the guidance that we are issuing and giving advice on a day-to-day basis with developments that come forward. That's being informed, if you like, as we learn through this process. So a number of sites clearly have delivered and continue to deliver biodiversity net gain type projects, which we obviously monitor. And you know, that sort of learning, if you like, is what will help inform further guidance that we'll be able to issue in the fullness of time. But you know, it is something we are trying to achieve, and obviously through the local plan process. Again, that gives us that other next opportunity to refine that, and working in partnership with other local authorities as well to try and find best practice and apply a consistent approach in those sorts of areas.
Thanks, Tom. And that obviously covers new GI, that sort of around new developments. But are there sort of procedures, guidelines, best practice being put in place around existing GI that we want to make sure is maintained, if not enhanced?
But that really comes back to touch on the sort of degree, the management plans that we have, if you like, which is an ongoing process. So for the larger open spaces that we're responsible for in the borough, you know, that's one of the key core activities is to have our management plan approach, working obviously with local stakeholders and groups that are involved in the management of those areas as well, keeping them under review, and obviously looking for opportunities to encourage and enhance biodiversity where we can. So I think that's an iterative process. Clearly, we've got the management plans that, you know, keeping on top of them, developing them is a core activity. And I say that the database we talked about is about how we harvest all of the activity and sort of schedule the work that needs to be done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carruthers, please.
Thank you, Chair. Really sort of tagging on to Councillor Konescu's question, really. In terms of the BIS, I suppose my question really is it possible to get the sort of to have sight of what we're finding out from this, because it is obviously a pilot, and I'd really like it if perhaps you could share with councillors at some point what you're finding. And I suppose really it's just personally the experience I had in Tadley was that I contacted the council to ask about some areas that residents had said to me, could we leave these areas aside and see if we can develop some biodiversity on them? And when I contacted the council, I was told, well, no, actually, and it's a bit more complicated than that. And we're doing this study, which was the BIS. And once we know the results of that, we might be able to roll it out to other areas, which is great. But at the same time, we need to be careful that that doesn't inhibit us doing things in other areas. I know that that wouldn't necessarily be part of the GI, but I was a bit disappointed that this project was actually meaning that then we couldn't do what we wanted to do in Tadley. So that's my comment, and my question is really that, you know, can we have sort of any of the findings from that pilot shared with councillors, please?
Councillor Raphael.
Chairman, the answer to that is yes, and one of the reasons why we have been carefully taking things with one or two other areas before we go further forward is to evaluate what has been happening at Hatchwarren and Begwood, because we're into year 2 and Chris Slack and his team need to measure things, and those measurements will come forward in the next few weeks and months, because we're obviously in the best time for measuring at the moment. And so when those measurements come forward, we will have 2 years worth of statistics where we can compare year 1 to year 2. And if the results say that species have increased and therefore we will be in a position to say, well, it's working. And obviously things move from there. What we don't want is a situation where it's made absolutely no difference or it's gone backwards. Because obviously then that doesn't provide an evidence base from which we can say to neighbouring wards, this is a good thing because, and which is what we want to say. As far as Councillor Carruthers and Tad is concerned, forgive me if she's contacted me directly, but I don't think she has. But if she has, forgive me. But I'm certainly prepared to meet with her and see if we can move things forward in Tadley. It's my approach that we ought to be looking at areas and trying to see if blockages and problems can be solved and removed. So very happy to discuss this further with her in due course.
Thank you, Councillor Raphael. Just one question from myself on the second box on page 5, where it is in amber. Okay, and thank you very much for the comments. But obviously, the amber means that it's fallen behind. And could you please reassure me and maybe explain a little bit about any plan that you have to actually bring it back on track?
Is this to do with the, can I explain my understanding of colouring, at least the one I applied when we moved the colouring around, which was green, we're on track at the moment.
Yes.
We've got there at all. It means we're on track for this year for what we should be doing. Yellow means we should be doing better or more. And red means we really haven't got started.
Yeah.
So,
okay. So if I'm sorry,
year.
sorry, Councillor Raphael, I understand that. That's kind of what I understood. But on page 5, okay, where we have 5 and 17, which is the geo mapping and accounting, it's obviously in amber, which means that it's fallen behind. So
yes, well, fallen behind hasn't got where it should be. We should, I think, have got on top of this green infrastructure mapping. That's
right.
why it is that colour. I can't remember if I changed it to that colour, but there was certainly something along here that I did, because I'm not happy about it.
Yeah.
Can I just say something about working natural capital accounting? This is quite a strange thing, but it comes in 2 parts. Absolutely right that we work out what the natural environment means to us, and from that work out how to protect it. But trying to turn it into pound signs is Mickey Mouse economics, and I don't go with it, I'm afraid. That's why it's been abandoned nationally in many places and hardly been tried. At the time that the strategy was set up, this was a bit of the rage and a slightly unknown, and therefore it was probably put in to see if it was going to work. But you can't say to someone, your land has this amount of value, and by the way, the trees have that amount of value, and expect them to take you seriously, because it's not the same. You're comparing chalk and cheese, and therefore if you're trying to put pound signs on it, it's Mickey Mouse. So that's why I won't go down that road. What I will go down the road is everything but that. And to do the assessment, to stress how important it is to local communities and to the environment at large, but not go down the road of putting pound signs on things that don't make sense.
And I'm fine with that, Councillor Raphael, but obviously, you know, the colour of the box in that particular instance is in amber, and I just would like to hear a little bit about what's being done to bring it back on track so it could go green. So you're back.
Seeing as I saw this last week, what is being done is my and your collective encouragement to get this mapping online for all to see. That, I think, will put it back on track, I would suggest.
Okay. Have you any comments on that, Chris and Tom?
I think obviously Chris has updated in terms of some of the work involves partners in other organisations and external, you know, local authorities, bringing together some of the mapping that we need. So sometimes it's outside of our control, and we're feeding into that. But and sometimes the mapping is already online. So some information is already publicly accessible through the website. But I'm not saying it's fine. It's there. It's perfect. Clearly, it's a work in progress. And yeah, the message is obviously loud and clear that we should be further forward. So it's an area that needs more focus and attention.
Okay, Chris, do you have any comment on that? Before you answer, can you please leave your video on? Okay, you don't need to keep switching it off at this particular point. Obviously, at the end of the paper, then you can. But I'd like to see you, okay, in all your glory.
Okay, Chair.
Throughout the paper, please. Okay.
Yeah. Just to say on one point, we'll be just a single point really. We'll be following up. Certainly with the local ecological network mapping with IT to make sure that goes onto the website as soon as possible.
Right. Okay. Okay. If you could possibly try and pin down as soon as possible to a time frame, I'll be happy to take that in writing. Okay. After the meeting. Okay. Does anybody have any more questions on those 2 boxes? Okay, so therefore we can move on to page 6. Okay, and we're looking at the beeline corridor mapping and identification. Has anybody got any questions on that? No? Okay, Councillor Mahaffey and then Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a very quick one. I've not come across the Beelines project before, so I'm a little bit ignorant on this. But I was interested, particularly when the name Silchester came up for obvious reasons. I've just gone onto the Bug Life website that's cited there, and I can't see any information about it. How are we publicising this? Could somebody give me an update on? Is it sort of in plan? Is it happening? Is it finalised, or where are we? Thank you.
Tom?
I look to Chris. Are you more informed on this one, Chris? I can certainly answer if you're.
Yeah, just to say, at the moment, it's basically the general beelines. There's about 3 main ones throughout the borough are on the Bug Life website. They're indicated on. There's a map that shows those 3 corridors through the borough. It's part of a national mapping system of these beelines across the country. But certainly, what we'll be looking at going forward is actually going into more fine detail on those and looking where we've got other projects and how they fit in with those general areas, such as BIS, such as any other projects we do, looking at things like farm management and the new ELMS, environmental land management funding coming through, and how that's going to fit with these beelines in terms of the specifics of which farms, which towns, etc. these things are going to run through. So it'll be drilling down to more detail over the next year or so in terms of how those
okay.
out.
Chair, can I just come back on that?
Certainly, yes, please.
Yeah. Thanks very much for that, Chris. Yeah, just on. I mean, maybe I'm looking at the wrong site. Maybe we can take this offline later. But I'm looking at the website now, and there's nothing that looks even sort of vaguely Basingstoke-ish on their website.
Well, Chairman, I've just sent him a picture of it.
Thank you
So
very much.
If you look at his phone, you'll see it on his WhatsApp.
That's very kind. But the supplementary question was, how do we get other? What information do we have that we can get out to the public? Because I know there's a lot of people would be very interested in participating and being aware of this.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Tom, we can.
Yeah, so certainly I do believe that there are things we already have done, to publicise this, but I'll have to take that away as an action just to come back to you. So for a more detailed answer, I can certainly find out what activity we've already done to promote this. It's obviously working closely with the organisation concerned to
and primarily how people can get involved. I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, and Tom and Chris, maybe you could come back on this. I mean, obviously we're waiting for a lot of information to come from other sources. How much of this is actually in our control? Okay, for gaining the information.
I would say,
just be honest.
Yeah, it's going to be related to the information on our own sites, to be honest, and any other information that comes through from HBIC on the SLA and the database that comes through on that, and then any information that's provided, for instance, at the AONB committees around farming practices, things like that. That's where the general kind of information is going to come through,
right?
That we can actually access, get through to.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody else have any questions, comments? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. No, I 100% behind the Beelines project. I think this is really, really good and exciting. I think the interesting thing that it raises for me, though, is, and again, it links to this idea of the policies and the influencing the broader agenda, is, is this going to feed through into local plan? Is this going to feed through into policies where we might be looking at a network recovery, nature recovery strategy of some kind that would be as it were, giving this the oomph it needs to really have an impact. It isn't just relying on partnership working and good relationships, but actually we've got a bit of behind it, so that when you use the phrase included within planning applications, actually those of us that sit on DC get to say, hang on a minute, here's a material consideration that we get to consider on this very thing. Because I mean, I've got the map, thank you, Mark. That for me, it just shows up the potential of this, and it's just going to be pushed and explored. And I'd really love us to develop a nature network recovery strategy. I think that would be superb, mapped across the borough to show really the strength of what we could achieve with our natural environment to bring back species and avoid the degradation really that we're talking about.
Great. Okay. Councillor Raffel.
Well, let me answer that question. The answer to it is yes. The first I became aware of this was obviously when I saw this paper. What I'm keen for everyone to understand is that what we're not doing is sitting back as a borough, and I mean this as in we must not be doing, is sitting back as a borough and saying, oh, this organisation's covered that, thank you very much, move on to the next thing. That is not what's happening. We're all working with each other. And the reason this is in here and the reason it's got a green rating at the moment is this information will help to inform. We are going to work with this information and build it into what we're doing next. Otherwise, that will go to red or something next time, because I was astonished when I saw this, because it was telling me what I felt I knew already. And some of you know why I'm saying this, that there are corridors across our borough, which I've talked about in the past, that have, in my view, been unrecognised. And if some independent body that takes these things very seriously is prepared to say that's absolutely right, then it ought to be part of the building blocks for us giving those corridors protection. And you'll see there's some other things in this list here, including things about DEFRA and other things as beyond. And we've got to work with these things. We can't simply say that it's up to them, because what I am finding as portfolio holder is that more and more people are doing more and more things, but we're not necessarily all talking to each other on it. And which means that the only people who benefit out of this are those people who want to sell land and build quickly, ultimately, rather than building the right homes in the right places. And as Councillor Harvey mentions, in development control, I've always been of the view that when a decision is made on planning, that the natural environment side of the application ought to get its best shot at explaining why there need to be compromises, or why in the particular situation the development should be over there, or sometimes it shouldn't happen at all. Not to be some half-hearted thing that members are either not informed, and possibly our experts who inform development control on landscape and everything else don't know the full picture because they don't know what other bodies are doing, which is part of the reason why I want to have everything on a website with all the information interconnected. So if we were going to have green infrastructure mapping, is it going to include the B-lines corridors? I mean, as a rhetorical question, because to my mind, as an outsider looking in on this, I would say, yes, why not? But I'm hoping the answer will be yes, definitely. But so I'm listening to all that you're saying, and it's really important that the officers understand that this has to be done. There are people around, one of whom addressed us today, but others around who we know have been telling us that this should have been done some time back, and they were telling us some time back it should have been done. They weren't saying, like in other things we do, we should have done it yesterday, but they've only just turned up to tell us. There are other things, and we should have done it. And the thing is, the technology is moving faster. So it's going to become easier to do, but we need to do it sooner. And it needs to happen before we get our local plan up and running, because otherwise site selection will be done without this information in people's minds.
That's correct. That's correct. Thank you, Councillor Raffel. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to just reinforce exactly what the portfolio holder has been talking about, and Councillor Harvey when he spoke to the nature recovery. Now, I represent the Borough Council, and as does Chris Slack as the officer to the North Wessex Down AONB. I also chair the management working group of that organisation. The point I want to raise is that 1/3 of the borough is within the AONB. Now, we in the AONB, and bearing in mind I've got a big Basingstoke hat on when I'm doing the work there, is pushing forward and will be discussing these various aspects at the Council of Partners meeting next week. The nature recovery programme and the farming in protected landscapes, which goes along with all this because it's all integrated together, especially with the environmental land management scheme that was mentioned in this report being run by DEFRA, is coming together very, very quickly. So if you're talking about talking to other people, yes, we are part of these other people that are actually directly affecting the borough. We advise the borough all the time. That's why I've got the biodiversity officer in the form of Chris Slack on with me, so that we can feed into our own local policies. It's all coming together. It's fitting together. And that's what I wanted to do to reinforce what Councillor Raphael is saying. It's coming very quickly. And I think within the next 12 months, we're going to see an awful lot of integrated movement of data. As we've got the data, we can do the mapping. And that's what's important. And I think we've been talking around that subject today. Yeah. So it's going to happen, believe you me.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Chris, do you want to add anything to what Councillor Miller said, or?
It's just to emphasise as well with the environment bill, which is coming online. There will be a requirement for the borough as well to provide information to the government of how that is being delivered. Nature recovery within the borough itself. So it's going to be a requirement of that bill when it comes through.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. Has anybody else got any questions on this particular section? No. Okay. So moving over the page, if there's still no questions, okay, and we're looking at page 7. Okay, so that's monitoring and review. Tom, do you want to take us through that one, please? Sorry, you're muted, Tom. Thank you.
The dangers of trying to look at a document whilst you've got Zoom open. Yeah, so really, this is just it's linking you to the data that was presented back in January at EPH then. So what you've got at the end of this particular paper is the direct extract from that report. So it's data that you'll have, most of the members who were sitting at that time will have seen before, in terms of how we just monitor effectively the core activities within the team. So that would be that sort of the routine sort of planning applications that we are examining and commenting on from a biodiversity landscape perspective, trees, etc. It very much forms a core part of some of the activity within the team with the specialist officers that we have, clearly with access to some of the information that we've been talking about already this evening, to make informed comments and influence decisions that are made. So again, that's quite a lengthy document, and as I say, it has been presented before. I wasn't proposing to go through it in much detail, but that's the nature of it. It was just to give you that sort of data to show what sort of activity is happening within the team.
Okay, Tom, I noticed that's also in an amber, okay, which I'll come on to you in a minute, Councillor Cormac, but that's in an amber, okay. Could you tell the committee what plans there are to actually bring that into a green state, so it's back on track of where where we need to be, please.
Yeah, I think what we're alluding to at the end of that section there is that, you know, where we think we've got some further work to be done is effectively in how we monitor biodiversity improvements on site. Obviously, there is activity that's happening, but we're conscious that there is a real drive to truly understand that and make sure that we are getting the biodiversity net gains that we are promised, if you like, through the development. You know, it's not something you can easily measure because, you know, obviously being a biodiversity matter, you know, it takes some evaluation and you have to look at that over a period of time and so on. So, you know, all the while we're sort of building up our knowledge on how we monitor biodiversity improvement on site, so we can refine how we do that. I think it's just a reflection to say we're not there yet in terms of, you know, truly to say, you know, we've got it mastered. There's no scope for any improvement in what we're doing. Clearly, we're not. It's an iterative process. We are targeting our resources on some of the bigger sites where we've got you know, a lot more to look at, and you know, I know Chris obviously does a lot of that monitoring himself with other members of the team. So it's just a reflection to say it's something we've got under review in terms of how we do that, particularly as biodiversity net gain is obviously going to be a really key policy in the emerging local plan as well. And it's just having regard to how do we track that, how do we monitor progress on sites to make sure these things are delivered. That's why it is in amber. Because
Great. Okay. All right. Moving to councillors. Councillor McCormack. Oh, McCormack, I do beg your pardon, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just picking up on Razors Farm's mention there. What was happening at Razors Farm?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor McCormack. It's just basically, I've been meeting with the enforcement officers basically on there for the last 4 years, I think it is, ever since the proposals came through in the various stages, and we're meeting with the developer on a regular basis over that time, getting them to actually undertake their commitments that they put forward within their development plans and what they stated within their conditions. So that was the main aspect of it, making sure those conditioned requirements, certainly for biodiversity, were getting enacted on site, which we managed to do to a great extent in the end. In terms of it was retaining the main oak trees and sites of importance for nature conservation on site. It was retaining adequate green buffers throughout the site. It was planting for wildlife, things like that, all those aspects. So that went on throughout the period of the development as different phases came online. So.
Thank you, Christopher. Councillor McCormack, your hand is still raised. Have you got a supplementary? You're muted.
It's not letting me unmute. No, thanks for that answer. I mean, it was more a case of Razors Farm is as a greenfield site. It did sort of raise some alarm bells there in terms of when there's things like tree felling and things going on. A quick drive up the A30 from the M3 Junction 7. There's some pretty awful looking tree felling going on at the moment, and I think it's incumbent that we make sure that we can mitigate as much as possible any damage that is coming with a new development, and I see that as an acid test of the entire strategy.
Thank you, Councillor McCormack. Councillor Konesko, you had your hand raised.
I did, but I took it down because Councillor McCormack asked a question about Razors Farm that I was going to ask. I guess I just add it. It's generally shocking that the response we've just heard, that we've had to negotiate with a developer over a number of years just to get them to comply with the biodiversity requirements that were in the planning application. And hopefully that attitude will change from developers going forward, because it's just not acceptable that they try and bend the rules on this, and we have to keep fighting them.
Thank you. I have to agree. Councillor Harvey, in a minute, I just would like to say that I know there are 26 planning consents that you're currently monitoring, and with 3 having enforcement action commencing. I'm just wondering whether you could bring a report, okay, just detailing, what those 26 sites and what you've actually been doing, okay, to actually bring it to a point where the enforcement action has been needed in detail. Would it be possible for you to do that, Christopher?
Yeah, I certainly can, Chair. I mean, what I do with the obviously these sites run over long periods of time.
Sure.
So we have things like every time I go out there over a 3 or 4 year period, we take photographs of what's been done, where that is, and then we can ally it with the habitat enhancement plan or the biodiversity plan that's been put in line, and just check back over the whole time period that things are actually taking place, and throughout the different phases of the development, because as you can imagine, with different phases, it's difficult sometimes to keep a track of actually with these developers or actually undertaking works, and sometimes some developments take longer than others to get to set phases whereby you can get a good picture of what's going on. But that's the main thing, is to keep a visual record and of what's going on and where there are issues over that long period of time.
Okay, thank you. If you can bring a report back, possibly via the portfolio holder, okay, just detailing the sites and what's been done, okay, and why you've needed to take enforcement action. Okay, that would be superb.
Certainly,
okay.
no problem.
Okay, Councillor Harvey, and then Councillor Carruthers.
Just picking up your point, I think that would be really, really helpful, because I mean, in terms of what Councillor Bowman, Andy's just raised, the comment about how this relates to the local plan then becomes pretty important. We're talking about a 10% biodiversity gain desired in the local plan. I'm still going to bang on my drum about nature network recovery strategy for the whole borough. That's critical. Then the question becomes one, for example, you get the Amazon application that decides to knock down great oak trees as a way of its development. You're left with that planning balance and the planning weight argument. And I just think getting that report as you've described it might help us draft a better strategy. I'd really like to see something with teeth. But again, at DC, we can turn around to a developer and say, I'm terribly sorry, but you are not delivering the biodiversity that we want. Here's the standard we set. And then gives it you on the other side, Chris, so that when you get a chance to negotiate something, you genuinely have got something to beat them over the head with when they're not doing it, because it's going to be not top of their agenda. And I want it to be top of their agenda.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Carruthers.
Thank you, Chair. The 26 planning consents that we're currently monitoring, I was just wondering what criteria we use to choose which, what to monitor. Is it the size of the development? Is it the location? How do we decide?
Certainly, Councillor, it mainly relates to, we do take an opinion on generally the larger applications, but also if there are any particular biodiversity issues, for instance, that are related to those areas. So if there's sensitive areas for some reason, and also geographically where they are as well, are they within sites of SSSIs and things like this. So but it's mainly trying to take in all those applications that could have issues at some point. Just from our professional makeup, when we're looking at the application itself, we can actually take an opinion on sites that are have varied ecological issues associated with them, and when a habitat enhancement plan or something like that goes in, there are multiple issues that may be affected, may go wrong, things like that. So we have to take a cut-off point somewhere, but it's taken with looking at the developments in the round, as the size of them, the particular ecological issues, if they're next door to any sites that are in particular importance, things like that, the environmental status of if they've got rivers running through them, that kind of thing.
Great, thank you. Okay, do you want to come back on that, Kerry?
No, that's fine, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Anybody else? Any more before we move on? Okay, let's move on to page 8. Okay, where we have 2 boxes. One's the project on engagement, and then also the skills review and training plan. Okay, so Tom, Chris, would you like to take us through these, please?
Yep. Shall I just start off with the first one? First box?
Yeah, please.
So obviously, been very difficult in the last year, as you'll appreciate, with the COVID and the restrictions around groups activity. So that's been somewhat curtailed, unfortunately, in terms of the activity they've been able to get involved with. However, that's in a sense provided us with a good point, and it's work that's been ongoing for a little while, just to make sure that we've got the appropriate processes and procedures in place to support the groups, make sure they've had the training that they need to undertake maintenance in a sort of safe way for them, and obviously what we can do to support them with training. Obviously, we do provide insurance. We fund insurance for lots of these voluntary groups who carry out some of the work on our land. We've obviously invested in new machinery and equipment for them as well. I know the team are also trying to identify sort of a tool store where some of the equipment can be kept. So there's a variety of activity that's going on. Obviously, goes without saying, we're hugely grateful for the support that we get from all of the volunteer groups. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge and effort put in by all concerned, which we are really, really grateful for. And obviously continue to do what we can to support and nurture and encourage that type of activity. So that's where we are in terms of support with volunteer groups locally. As I say, it's been somewhat constrained in the last 12 months, of course, due to COVID. But with the impending lifting of restrictions, I think we can reasonably predict that there'll be a surge of interest, and activity will then start to pick up, and those groups will be able to resume their sort of activities that they were doing previously. So that's one significant element of the sort of routine work we do. Obviously, with the BIS, we'd always, it's not mentioned here, but obviously with the BIS, we'd always intended to work with local schools, with the volunteer groups, and some of the people we've been working very closely with, to bring them into that, and to get the children involved and understanding what we're trying to achieve, and so on. Again, unfortunately, another consequence of COVID is that work has been put on hold effectively because of the restrictions that were in place. But nonetheless, that's another activity that we want to pick up on. There's obviously opportunities there, given the proximity of local schools and the interest that they've shown. And obviously through the work that's going on at the moment with the development of the East of Basingstoke Natural Environment Master Plan, again, that's work that started, thankfully. Again, that's something that was put on hold due to the pandemic last year, but work has really got going, and the consultancy that we're using have engaged already with a number of local groups and representatives to get their thoughts about opportunities for those particular areas, and that engagement work is yielding results, in the sense that that's all helping to formulate the strategy that will emerge from that piece of work. So that's what I was going to say in relation to the first box. Second box is really just that, again, this is an ongoing action, really. You've got a variety of different staff within Natural Environment team and Parks and Streets team more broadly, some of whom will undertake CPD activities, so compulsory professional development type of training for the sort of professional qualifications that they may hold. And then, for operatives, if you like, in terms of GM sort of side of things, they have routine training. Some of that will be health and safety driven, so using the equipment to machinery they use safely, but also, it's very specific training that they'll also receive in terms of habitat management and just improving their sort of general knowledge of what they should be cutting, what they shouldn't, really, in a nutshell. So there's a lot of that sort of routine training that goes on. It's an ongoing process.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Okay, well, I've got Councillor McCormick, then Councillor Mahaffey, then Councillor Dillow. Councillor McCormick, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question really, I'm looking at page 8 and on the first row. Much commendable work engaging with conservation groups listed there. We have a large number of conservation groups in the town, but we also have areas of the town that would benefit from conservation groups that have either not yet been set up or are struggling to, keep going, have been set up and disbanded, or are in some kind of suspended animation trying to set up. Is there any provision to actively assist some of the conservation groups? Years ago, we did have that. We did have attached officers, and the Popley and Marnell Conservation Group, the conservation volunteers, when that was set up, we had considerable officer support. So I'm just wondering if that is a factor in the plan.
We do still have, Councillor Raphael might want to add in as well. We do have a dedicated officer who does support those groups and attends some of their routine sort of meetings to talk through issues, and I'm sure would be happy to have conversations with any groups that are thinking of setting up, just to obviously give them some direction, and I'm more than happy to provide you with the officer's contact details outside of the meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not quite like it was perhaps previously, some decade and a half ago, where officers were trying to chivvy people into doing something. We're now in a situation where people are trying to chivvy us to do something. People are coming out of all sorts of places saying this is what we value, and we're here to make sure that they're supported in what they do. And one of the examples was that the questionnaire tonight. Obviously, Natural Basingstoke does its best to act as an umbrella organisation and give support in its own way. And obviously, I have regular meetings with them to discuss some of the strategies and policies that we're introducing. So I would say take Tom Payne up on that if Councillor McCormack's got any organisation in particular he's thinking of. But like all these things, it's not about top-down government saying, we'll take it over and run it. No, it's about people coming forward and saying we care passionately about these things, and the Borough Council saying, fine, good, excellent, we support you in that, and let's make it work.
Thank you, Councillor Raphael. Councillor Mahaffey.
Thank you, Chair. It's a request more than a question. I just wanted to kind of link box F that we're talking about with engagement to box J, which is funding. We're all involved with local voluntary groups. There's some fantastic grassroots organisations out there. But it always amazes me whenever I get involved with a group, a local group, that the first thing they always struggle with is where are we going to find the money? And then they spend an awful lot of time and energy looking for grant sources. If we are doing that anyway, I don't think local grassroots organisations should have to spend too much time and effort doing the research on that. I think we should have that immediately online so that we can support them to say, look, we're not providing the money, but we can provide the information to where you can go and find the money. Could that be factored into this?
Can I answer that? Because
certainly, Councillor.
It may be. I mean, the answer to his question is yes. But can I answer it specifically? Clearly, from the borough's strategic point of view, it is in a much better place to look for external funding than smaller groups are. But when it looks at projects, and the examples given there are with the Basingstoke one, it is working with the smaller conservation groups that exist in that area. So in a sense, the collective power of the council can probably achieve more, which by working with them and seeking external funding if that's possible. I'm not too sure that the borough necessarily is going around at the current moment looking for opportunities for external funding on a much smaller level. But that may be not what Councillor Mahaffey is meaning. But I think if projects come along that are more that are appropriate for the borough to progress, then clearly that will mean that the borough will be working with local groups to seek external funding opportunities where there is an overlap.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Raphael. I understand entirely that the box J is slightly different in quantum to the smaller projects that I'm talking about. But my point being is, we have a resource in terms of we are looking for funding sources, and that should be easily accessible to local grassroots, be it of whatever size. It just seems to take an awful lot of energy from these small organisations trying to figure out where they're going to get the money. And I think their first port of call should be to me as a borough councillor or to us as a council to say, where do I go? I'm not going to fill the forms in for you, but I can at least point you in the right direction. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Mahaffey. Councillor Dillo, please.
Yeah, it was just a quick query. Obviously, with the delay due to COVID, do you think the RAG should be amber? And then obviously, given a priority to get it back on track.
Tom.
I suppose really COVID's entirely outside of our control. I mean, there's a lot of work that's been done in this period with the groups nonetheless to develop some of the processes that they need to follow effectively to so a lot of work has been put in. It's not that we stopped all activity and engagement continues with the groups, just means that they've been prevented from getting out on site as a sort of larger work parties, if you like, due to the social distancing restrictions and the restrictions on meeting outdoors, etc. It's been quite clear that the volunteer activity was one of those things that was prevented from happening due to the COVID restrictions. So it will bounce back, and clearly that's likely to be later this month if things continue as they are, and that activity will resume again. So there's more we can do other than just wait for those restrictions to finally lift, and certainly nothing we're doing to prevent the groups from carrying out all the work that they want to.
No, it's just obviously the Green is saying that it's on schedule.
Well, again, I'd argue it is. So it's what we are doing is supporting all of those groups as best we possibly can. But the fact that COVID has restricted the amount of stuff that they can actually get out and about and do as larger groups is the only thing really that's changed in the last 12-18 months. But hopefully by the end of this month, that situation will have changed, and they'll be able to carry out the full sort of range of activities that they would have done otherwise. So it's absolutely the commitment is there to support those groups and for them to get back to doing what they were doing before.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. Councillor Carr, please.
Yes, hello. I think it would be quite useful, Mr. Chairman, to have a sense of who these 20 groups are, because I'm just wondering whether one of the smaller groups in my part of the world is involved or not, because they're fairly new. So I wondered whether we could see a list of that group of 20, and then it would also be quite useful to know who we would contact on an officer level to put groups in our area in touch with you, just so that there can be that bottom-up coordination.
Tom, do you want to bring an answer to that?
Yeah, no, I can get outside the meeting. I can email you directly and provide you, Councillor Carr, with the contact details for the officers' concerns, so that you've got that connection.
That's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Carruthers, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief one really on box G, skills review and training plan. Just wondered if perhaps I might suggest at some point having a briefing for councillors on the GI. I think that going back to sort of what's being talked about with there being plenty of small groups locally, it would be great perhaps if we had the opportunity to learn a little bit more so that we can pass that through to our residents and inform councillors that perhaps aren't otherwise involved. Thank you.
I think there's agreement there, Councillor Carruthers. Okay, thank you very much. Just one quick question before we move on. In box F on engagement. I seem to remember something about the Basingstoke Canal Society. I think it's the name there. Should that actually be mentioned here in the lovely acronym of the EBNEMP engagement?
Yes and no, but no, the answer is going to be no. The reason being is because that is a project which currently the canal, whilst it geographically was in it, is not something that is in the same league as what we're doing with the Canal Society elsewhere in the borough. So, for instance, there's borough land where the canal bed is still there, and we are trying to organise getting a footpath along to enable the last 5 miles from Maple Durwell, or I should say up Nately, or from the Greywell Tunnel end, can have a footpath link back into Basingstoke. So that's that objective. It might conflate the two. They're well aware of what's happening with the Eastern Basingstoke Natural Environment Management Plan, but it's not part of it. That's much more about linking with the Basing Parish Council, resident groups, and looking in and out from the Basingstoke perspective, looking out towards east, and from the east looking west towards Basingstoke and the Millfield Conservation Group. So, I mean, it's a sort of, there's got to be a limit to what we're doing, and then they're not going to say, well, it's great. I mean, they've got no, they want us to do stuff, but it's slightly out of their control because it's in private ownership. It's in Basing House. It's in more private ownership, and the little bit we have got going on the bend into East Rock Park is a bit further down the line for what might be done.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Raffel. Okay, so does anybody have any more questions on those two boxes? Councillor Harvey.
Just quickly, Chair. Mark, can I ask you, just in terms of that top section on the comments bit, are we confident that we've got through all the red tape issues that some of the groups were facing on insurance and tools and operating tools appropriately on sites? Because I know that was a problem, wasn't it, for a number of the groups?
The answer to the question is, I think we've just got to keep working at it. I wouldn't like to say that we're through it all, to be fair. It's an ongoing process. I've got an outstanding communication with one of their leaders. Oh, we've lost democratic services. That could be good. We're on a free wheel now.
Yeah.
No,
we can have some fun.
I'm still here.
Oh.
Sorry.
We thought we were going to be unrecorded and we could talk about something else while you weren't listening. Okay, so the fact of the matter is, yeah, I've got to keep working at it. I've had an email from one of their chief people recently, and we've got to make it work. I think the best way of looking at it is the part that Councillor Dillo was mentioning. That obviously things have been slightly frozen in aspect because of the pandemic in terms of our engagement with them. And so we're sort of picking up where we left off in March of last year now, where they're obviously keen to get involved, especially this time of the year. and we've just got to make it work. I mean, personally, as you know, I find the bureaucracy about health and safety and insurance a pain in the proverbial, but at the same time, if someone's leg got badly injured by some power-driven tool on our land, they'd be perfectly at liberty on legal advice to take action against the landowner who said you could go and chop it and do it on our land. That's us. So we have to protect ourselves from losing huge sums of money through being rather careless with how we protect ourselves legally. And at the same time, we must make sure that everyone has proper training so that they're kept safe as well. So it's not straightforward, but we just got to keep working at it. Because the last thing we want to do is scotch the enthusiasm of wonderful volunteers. We want to make them flourish.
Thank you, Councillor Rafael. Okay, so if no one's got any more questions, let's move on to the next page, which is I've got, oh gosh, it's actually hidden, page 9. Okay, hidden in the typing. Okay, and there's a couple of boxes there, H and J. Okay, Tom, do you just want to very quickly just run through those boxes? Gallop even?
Gallop, right, okay. So, you know, a lot of the core activities of the team linked to this. Obviously, it reflects on the point that was made by the speaker at the beginning, the public speaker, that obviously open spaces, particularly during the pandemic, have proven to be incredibly valuable and important for every member of the public. So, you know, and a lot of work has been done and continues to be done to deliver enhancements and improvements to our open spaces in the borough. Massive investment in some of our large parks in the past 12 months, and Popley, notably, War Memorial Park, Beggarwood, etc. You know, there's some really huge schemes that have been put in place there to benefit local residents, improve those facilities for them. But clearly, again, going back to the East of Basingstoke, yeah, again, that is a strategy for looking at how we could develop and enhance those areas into the future, or other areas in the East of Basingstoke in the future as well. So, you know, it is a primary activity in terms of day-to-day, and obviously the East of Basingstoke project itself is going to be really helpful to inform the strategy for us moving forward.
Thank you, Tom. I've just got one question, if the committee will indulge me, is that if we've done so much, okay, you know, with the green gyms, the path improvements, etc., why is the RAG amber on this? What else do you expect? What else do you think, you know, should have been done?
I think the appraisal of that is the second element to the action, which is about engagement with clinical commissioning groups, which I think is not something we have actively progressed. So it's a reflection of that element of that particular action that we have not really made a huge amount of progress with at this point. So yeah, lots of improvement in terms of open spaces and some of the activity we're doing to inform the strategy to improve our open spaces. What we haven't made a great deal of progress with is about working with the CCG to look at their priorities and see if we can sort of support each other.
Yeah, I've marked it harshly. We don't want, you know, it might some nice Weasley words saying, "Oh yeah, it's all fine." So I think we can do more.
Thank you, Councillor Rafael. Okay, Councillor Miller.
I'm going to ask thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask Tom a very hard question. How have you been trying to get hold of the CCG? I think I've probably got more contact with the CCG than the officers in the council. If you want contact with the CCG, talk to me. Talk to some of the other councillors around here. I've got a direct line to one of the directors. You know, a lot of us have been involved in delivering the vaccine and assisting our local practices and the CCG. If you've got a problem, ask us.
There you go, Tom. Okay, you got a direct line through to one of the directors of the CCG there.
Thank you.
Let's use it. Okay, has anybody got any more comments, questions? No. Okay. Anybody got any comments and questions on funding? No. Okay, so moving over the page. Okay. To page 10. Okay, where we have the delivery of green infrastructure. Okay, has anybody got any questions on this? Tom, do you want to take us through it a little bit?
Obviously, part of this relates to obviously the voluntary groups, which we've talked about already, so I won't take that. Obviously, we are working with a number of different groups. I think the thrust of the action was about obviously different models for delivery of management of stuff on site, and obviously in certain cases through development processes, particularly, that is explored. Obviously, developers may have their own ways of wanting to manage sites moving forward. So to an extent we do that through that process, through a planning process, and look at how sites are going to be managed. But I think this was a bit broader, and obviously we are working with other groups such as the Basingstoke Canal Society, and looking at how we can deliver projects with them in the borough. I don't know if Chris has anything further to add on in terms of the work we're doing in that area, but that's all I can add.
Okay, Chris, has Tom done a good job explaining that box? Okay, so I saw.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, all right, thank you. I saw Councillor Harvey's hand first, and then Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, I think in terms of community land trusts and the other issues there of management of green spaces, one of the issues that's come up recently at DC has been offsetting nitrates with particular zones for biodiversity and so on to do an offset. That offset is sometimes related to management companies running those particular sites, and then costs being transferred back onto residents in the properties that were then being offset against. So there is an issue there, I think, in terms of how we might govern policy going forward and looking at that for this particular comment about community land trusts and the management of green spaces, and in that very particular example of nitrate offsetting. So I'd like to see that picked up somewhere so that we can deal with that. And whether that's here on this particular point, I know it's threaded throughout a number of the different actions, but I don't like the idea of residents being landed with big costs because a developer's got to offset their site with a nitrate zone somewhere else and then being slapped with a management bill because of it. And if we can head that off at the pass, I think that would be really, really helpful. And if this strategy can guide that in local plan policy, again, that would be great. Just joining up the dots, really.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, as you say, local plan led, if you like. So we're working with the policy team to look at how this is best delivered. Obviously, this is fairly new territory for local authorities, and very much looking at how other authorities are approaching this with the same sorts of issues and concerns being explored. So, but I think it's primarily the focus is through the planning route, because this is a policy development issue through the local plan, an important one. And certainly the team is feeding into that, but it's going to be led through the local plan.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Harwood, you have a second question? Okay, Councillor McCormack, and then Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Chair. It was just picking up on the Basingstoke Canal and the Canal Society. So we discussed at the LC Whip recently the possibility of having a path right away to open up access along the canal. Is that congruent with the sort of activities you're doing in the context of this strategy with the Basingstoke Canal Society?
The answer to the question is broadly yes. The difficulty is obviously land ownership, but yes is broadly yes. And that will be moved forward as part of that, yes. I wasn't aware of the LC Whip stuff because I'm not necessarily going there anymore. But I am obviously aware of everything under the management plan.
Thank you.
Great. Okay.
Sorry, I should, can I thank Councillor McCormack for raising it, because this is all part of joining it all up. If I was a bit brusque, sorry.
Certainly. Okay. Thank you, Councillor McCormack. Okay, Councillor Carr.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of joining things up, one thing I haven't really seen thus far, though it might be because I'm a newer councillor, is whether you have a good relationship with the Hampshire Countryside Service. I mean, what's the relationship like between yourselves and them? Because in my part of the world, there's less of the borough managed land and more of the sort of the general countryside land. So I'd be interested in how that relationship works in practice. Is it quite cooperative?
Yeah, I mean, Chris might be able to chip in here in time to unmute in terms of relationships, but yeah, certainly through the Hampshire and Isle Wildlife Trust, I know it's not Hampshire Wildlife Service, but Countryside Service, but we do have strong links with those sorts of groups. But Chris might be able to link. Elaborate.
Yeah, certainly. It just depends on what issues being dealt with, really. But we communicate with them regularly on things such as access. If a site involved is an HCC related site, that kind of thing. But it's mainly led on the actual issue at the time that's coming up. So we don't kind of communicate with them day to day. It is more of that. If an issue comes up that is related to both parties, then we will be dealing with HCC on that aspect. It's not just a countryside service as well, though. Kind of the example at Biz and other areas in the rural areas as well, where we're dealing with the actual the highways team as well, relating to areas around grass verges and things like that. So we're dealing with several departments, but also HBIC as well sits, and the ecology service sits within HCC as well. So we're dealing with them on a regular basis, all the time over data recording, things like that, but also related to any issues to do with ecology.
Fantastic. Okay. Does that answer your question, Councillor Carr?
Yes, that's reassuring. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. If no one has any more questions on page 10, let's move over to page 11. Okay, where we have the development of projects within biodiversity priority areas and development of projects within the urban green spaces. Let's take the biodiversity priority areas first. And Tom, if you'd like to just gallop through that one, please.
Might defer to Chris because he's going to know the detail of these
okay,
more so than myself, if that's all right.
If we can run through it very quickly, Chris, that'd be wonderful.
Okay, sorry, I'm just getting it up on my screen.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, yes, yeah. So with the upper end of the Loddon, we had a variety of projects that were being mentioned at the Loddon Catchment Partnership, which we're a member of. These are now being tied up into the East of Basingstoke Environment Plan project, because obviously it involves places like Black Dam, places like Eastrop Park, all these places like Basing Fen, all these upper areas. So that's now being tied all into kind of looking at it as a big project, that East of Basingstoke planning. So it's all being fed into that. Biodiversity Net Gain, this is something that's kind of, I'm putting it in here, but it's one that's coming online because of the new switch with the 10% related to the local plan coming through and the environment bill. So there will be projects that the new state of biodiversity net gain, we're looking for things like 30-year Section 106 agreements agreed with these, because what it's supposed to do is deliver these biodiversity improvements in perpetuity within these developments. So it's supposed to give that security of delivery across long time periods, which is part of what the Environment Bill is about. So I put in an example there. None of them have actually gone totally through at the minute. It's just because we're at that stage where, you know, we're only a year into Biodiversity Net Gain, so these schemes are coming online and they're not at that deal in the process at the moment. So I put Oakley Hall in there at the minute, but there are several others that we're dealing with as biodiversity officers at the minute that will be looking for those net gain biodiversity plans to deliver schemes within those biodiversity action areas. And then there's council support of the watercress and winterbournes project, which is being delivered by Hampshire Wildlife Trust with partners over on the Test and Itchen catchments, which is a variety of projects really based around everything from silt reduction up near Stoke and St Mary Bourne through runoff into the stream there, to things like community involvement on things like River Fly project, which is a means of surveying the quality of the water quality in the river through invertebrate and insect sampling, through to children's projects looking at working around the wildlife in the river, a whole host of projects, things like physical enhancements of the river corridor and things like that as well. And that's a 1.9 million Heritage Lottery funded project.
Wow.
That's operating on that area.
Thank you very much.
And that's the main ones.
Great. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on this box? No.
Well, I dare say some of you may be saying, goodness me, I haven't heard of the Loddon Catchment Partnership before. and I hadn't until about a week or two ago. And I've asked for an update, and Chris Lack very kindly provided me one. And I've discovered that it brings together organisations and individuals to plan and deliver actions which improve the water environment across the Loddon catchment. And it's hosted by the South East Rivers Trust. They meet every 4 to 5 months. And there are other local authorities involved: the Environment Agency, Natural England, Hampshire Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, water companies, National Farmers Union, University of Reading, and 1 or 2 other bodies besides. And not a single councillor from Basingstoke and Deane. I didn't even know about it until I stumbled across it 2 weeks ago. So watch this space, because I'm going to find out what they're up to, and I'm going to share it with you.
Thank you, Councillor Raphael.
All right.
I'll volunteer to go on it.
Yeah, I know you like going on things and telling us, and I'm sure you'd be very good at it. So I want member input into these things. We can't have meetings where we don't even know what's going on.
No. Is that the reason why it's in the RAG's in amber?
One of my reasons, yes.
Okay, what are the others, Councillor Raphael? Just to get to the nub.
Well, it seemed to me that this was full of good intentions, and other people seem to be delivering it.
Right. Okay. Fair one. Okay. Tom, Chris, do you have anything to say to that?
Well, yeah, so a lot of these activities aren't they, a partnership approach? Whether you look at the AONB, whether you look at the Loddon, you know, we don't act in isolation. There are established groups that plan and coordinate activity to deliver the outcomes, the strategic outcomes that they're trying to achieve. But obviously, we are contributing there. I think the one mentioned in terms of the Loddon Valley Group, for example, that's been in existence for quite a while, I believe. But you know, it's about sharing that, isn't it? And I think that's the point, that it's come across loud and clear that whilst there's been these officer groups and the strategies are being developed, and you know, we need to share that and make sure members have sight of what's happening, so that you have that knowledge. So yeah, that's the learning point.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not here to I'm not criticising officers. I'm looking forwards to say we've got to do these things better, because it's such a complex thing we're looking at. It's so extensive, and officers are doing what they think is best, and I'm gradually having a look underneath the carpet and around the back of the wardrobe and finding out all sorts of things are going along merrily, and they're doing a great job, but none of us know what it is. And this is one of them.
Thank you, Councillor Raffel. Okay, does anybody have any questions on this box? No? Okay. Shall we move on to the development of projects within the urban green spaces then? Okay, has anybody got, Councillor Harvey?
Thanks, Chair. I was looking at that again. It just relates to the comments we said at the beginning. When you look at the strategic aims, you've got paragraph 13, and then you go to the section in the strategy that covers it off on the tree canopy. And it was just a piece of work that we've been doing recently, and it was fascinating and concerning that stood out as an area of real need and work in the urban area. So, for example, Northern only has a 14% tree canopy set against a target of 20%. And a lot of the urban area is suffering from a lack of green tree canopy, as it were, to deal with the issues that are present in those wards. And it's not the only one. I mean, Popley, Buckskin, Southam, Brookvale, all of them have got it. Some of them are helped out by the fact they've got the parks in them, so they hide the real urban figure because you've got the local park in it, like Brookvale's got the Blue Gardens and so on. But in an area of that being then considered to be green, I would have preferred that to be amber, because within that section, there are some areas there that I would point out as being a matter of concern, and I'd like to see some more progress on, particularly on that particular example. Well, that's just one example of the ones I can pick out. But that was just an area that we've highlighted locally that is something that concerns us, because it's the nature of the environment. We talked about air quality, we talked about all those other issues. All of that relates to that particular strategic aim that was put into the plan in the first place. So I'd rather see that amber than green and just pick out those points if that was okay. Thank you.
Okay, did we capture them? Did you capture those points, Tom?
Yeah, do you want to hear from Tom on that? Because if he thinks that in the
if he thinks it should be green, then great.
Yeah, but just come back. I mean, this is an angle that perhaps we haven't looked at. I know why it was felt to be green, because things had been being done, and that's what the whole point is, to say what have we done, and it looked good. Or the alternative view is that we capture it and we say, well, when we come back in due course, it's there, and if it hasn't been done, then it will slip from green to amber. Tom, do you want to come back? Because I think Councillor Harvey deserves an answer.
Yeah, I think we, as you say, we have delivered a variety of different projects. Clearly, in terms of your ward, into the Northern, absolutely, it's a very sort of densely populated area, if you like, and therefore suffers from a deficit in open spaces. Although, not far away, there are some very fantastic parks and open spaces within a reasonable distance, but nonetheless within the ward, it's an overall deficit. I get that, but there's very limited opportunities, perhaps, to change that underlying situation just because of the amount of physical space available. Obviously, there are big development. We've got a big development. I won't name which one it is. With a lot of funding coming on stream associated with that to develop open spaces and improve open spaces and facilities locally. So there is a big opportunity with that money that's coming through in due course to secure Section 106 monies that will secure improvements in your ward. So that's the opportunities that we're waiting for, so that we can do that further work.
Councillor Harvey.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I guess that does raise another point, Tom. I mean, if you take Southam, you take Popley, you take us in Northern, we have a finite amount of open space. Unless those developers are going to magic open space out of thin air, we can't improve it for the sake of improving it to the point of improving the same thing over and over and over again. I mean, if we're going to have development in our wards, we've got to be able to say to those developers, you have to give us new green space for the new population that you're bringing in. We can't just be the fact that it's great, we take the money, thank you very much. but you can only improve something so much with a finite physical amount of open space. You've got to be able to create some new stuff. And there are ways and means of improving the situation on trees and the situation on the others. I just think it's, I'm not saying you've done nothing, and that's not in any way part of my argument. All I'm saying is these are areas that need significant thought and improvement. And there are things we can do and should be doing, but I don't see it captured here necessarily set against those strategic aims you've listed, 1B, 5, 7, 13, and so on, because each of them has an element to it. And I don't, to be fair, actually, then your paragraph isn't doing justice to what you've been doing. Your paragraph isn't doing justice to what we can do. So that's my point, and then I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Okay. Do you want to come back on that, Tom, Chris? Yes, no?
Not specifically. I actually take it on board. I think there is, one example perhaps will be the tree policy, which we are updating and we'll be updating in the next 12 months. And that very much is looking at that issue you've just mentioned in terms of tree canopy cover across different wards, and then informing, if you like, a more strategic approach to where we need to improve tree coverage, if you like, canopy coverage. With the sort of routine planting that we do. So there are things that we're actively looking at in terms of how we can address that in a sort of strategic and prioritised way. But that's just one element of it.
Sure, I just thought it was it's quite interesting that Councillor Harvey just pointed out the fact that you've done more than you've actually put down in the paragraph. I don't know whether that was just a question of trying to paraphrase everything. Okay. But again, it might be the case that blowing your own trumpet,
It's the balance with what you can squeeze into a small table and how we can supplement that with appendices where necessary.
Sure, I understand that, but it may be worthwhile getting a bigger box then. Okay. But there we go. Okay, so has anybody got any more questions on those two, L&M? Or shall we move on? Okay, so we move on to page 12 where there's 3 boxes this time. Okay, N is the GI improvements in areas of new development. Okay, and then we've got production implementation of the biodiversity compensation framework, which is interesting, and the green space management plans. So Tom, Chris, do you want to take us through those? No.
I think the first point, the first box I'll start off, and Chris can jump in when
sure.
I'm muted. Obviously, the first bullet, row is effectively just reflecting the fact that this is enshrined in the local plan policies, and the team has been doing a lot of work already in terms of some of the sites that are coming forward to evaluate them, but also to inform the policy development in terms of protected landscapes and green spaces and GI, biodiversity net gain, etc. So that's a very much a core activity at the moment, as you'll appreciate, with the local plan work that's ongoing. I will call on Chris to support with the answer in terms of Project P, production and implementation of biodiversity compensation framework. Chris might be able to support with that one.
Yeah, it's kind of developing in 2 ways at the minute, in that we're rolling out biodiversity net gain on developments that are coming through at the minute as part of the our landscape and biodiversity SPD, and looking at what was contained within the national the NPPF, the National Planning Framework, looking at rolling out the 10% net gain and requirement for these long-term biodiversity plans to deliver these schemes on sites. The main thing is that we're looking at policies to put that through into the oncoming local plan. We're awaiting the Environment Bill to come through to actually ratify all of this in terms of its overall framework, and how if there's going to be any last minute changes from government in terms of how things are delivered. But we're trying to get somewhat ahead of the game in terms of it's been, you know, this biodiversity net gain has been put forward for the last 5 years as such, and we're just in that process of the environment bill's been delayed so long now. We're just waiting for it to come through so we can get these things fully ratified. But in terms of biodiversity net gain, we usually look at it on sites over, I think it's 0.1 hectares, in terms of looking for a biodiversity metric which measures the amount of habitats before and after development, and gives a measurement of percentage of net gain. And we try and look at every development from kind of minor developments up in terms of delivering that 10%. And once that's been delivered, then we look at a biodiversity plan being put in place after that to deliver that net gain over, you know, in perpetuity is what it's supposed to be for, or the life of the development. And that's how it's changed really from what we were delivering before, in that it's actually putting an emphasis on, yes, you've got to show us a measurable gain. You've got to show us it's got to be more than 10%, and it's got to be long term. So they're the main things. It's kind of getting that constant supply of biodiversity improvement over the long term in the borough, these developments.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much for that. I can see one hand up. Councillor Dillo.
Yeah, it was just on Project N. In the comments, it mentions obviously the Many Down Country Park. And I just wanted to, if you could sort of clarify what's the work that you're doing with the forward planning and development control. Is because obviously personally, it's this is in my ward, so obviously I would prefer that the country park is made an early priority. But how is it actually done?
So there is, well, I don't know if Councillor Raphael will want to say something as well on this, I'm sure, but we are working with planning in terms of the Section 106 to deliver the country park in terms of how that's set out, how that will be delivered. So that's the part we are playing to sort of provide our input and guidance and technical advice in terms of how that's shaped up at the moment. Clearly a lot of involvement prior to this, but that's what's happened most recently. But also in terms of engagement with urban and civic more recently, officers from Natural Environment team out on site with representatives from urban and civic looking at those particular areas and discussing you know, particular ideas and thoughts about how that can be rolled out. But I know that Councillor Raphael will want to say something on the country park.
Well, yes. I mean, I'm glad they've had their recent meeting, because I've been banging on about it for ages, and now, of course, our Natural Environment team can meet directly with Urban Civic and cut out anybody who might have been in between, and that's progressing matters far faster than it might have been otherwise. So it's my ambition, from our point of view, is to establish what does the country park mean, who is going to manage it going forwards, because it seems to me that we've got to get those answers before we can then start to say, and we want it to be opened as soon as possible, in time with the first houses being built. I won't comment about when those first houses are going to be built, but I see it as something that has to be coming sooner rather than later, especially as it's been marketed as something that will benefit the residents of Winklebury whilst they have to endure the changes to their west, that they will get this as a benefit, something they can go and enjoy. So I have been pushing and pushing and pushing, and at last we seem to be getting somewhere.
Thank you, Councillor Raphael. Councillor Dillo, do you want to come back on anything?
Yeah, no, obviously, you know, I definitely think that the residents of Winklebury deserve the park and the new open space, so that you know, there'll be some sort of fitness trail, sort of exercise stations and all that sort of thing, so that obviously they can get a benefit from it whilst there is the ongoing construction.
Thank you, Councillor Dillo. Councillor Farrell, do you want to come back on that, or has everything been said?
Everything's been said.
Thank you. Okay, does anybody else have any more questions on Councillor Miller?
Yeah, I'd like to carry on with that issue of the country park. Councillor Raphael knows that certainly in my involvement in DC, we were always focused on that country park to come along sort of as early as possible within the scheme. Now that the outline permission's been gleaned and the S106 is still being progressed as far as I understand, that country park is of such a size that it needn't be just an area of grass or the odd fitness trail. You can get an awful lot into that. And there's been a lot of discussion at the AOMB about this, because it is directly in the setting of the North Wessex Downs AOMB. I think the separation distance is about 120 meters between the boundary of the AOMB and the country park. It's very, very close. So there's an opportunity. I like to use the word opportunities for the park to actually not only provide the open space for residents, but we've got an opportunity for education purposes within that country park as well. Now, the best thing I've got to help me along with this is having Chris Slack as my officer representative on the AOMB. Chris Slack, if you look into his CV, managed country parks for 20 years. Now, we are very, very fortunate on this council to have somebody with his experience. And I'm just waiting for the opportunity where the elected members, the ward councillors, and those of us that take an interest in this whole topic are going to have any visibility of this. I think that's one of the questions coming out from Councillor Diller's question. And now that the outline application's gone, when do we get to see the detailed ideas that came out from the consultants that Urban and Civic engaged for the outline of the country park, when really the elected members need to have a look at it to see if that is what we're quite happy to accept for our borough. It's the biggest piece of green area that we've developed for many, many years.
Thank you, Councillor Miller.
I sort of sensed that was coming in my direction, only because everyone else has gone silent. But I have absolutely no problem with it coming in my direction and me coming before you and discussing it. But I don't know if it is coming in my direction or whether it's going to go to some sort of many down scrutiny committee overview, whatever it's called, or whether it's being managed and dealt with very much on a basis that the council can have some form of oversight, but no actual involvement in management. I don't know the outcomes of that, but I'm pushing from our point of view that as far as I'm concerned, this is important green open space that the borough needs to know what's going on about it. And that's why the officers are engaging with Urban Civic on it. And everything has been very positive in recent weeks. So I suspect you're going to say to me, can we report back on this in due course? And the answer is yes, of course.
Thank you very much, Mark. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. But I think I'm speaking on behalf of most of the people on this call.
Yeah, I think so too, Paul. Sorry, Paul Harvey. Paul Miller. Paul Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. Can I raise an issue with N again? And this is a bit of the old conflicting priorities here. We had the local plans conversations recently where there's been lobbying for intensification of use in the town centre, intensification of use in urban areas. Now, if that is the case and that policy is pursued out with the green infrastructure strategy, then it's contradictory to what we're saying here is what we want to achieve potentially on sites within the town centre. Because the idea of intensifying those uses, going taller or going for more density, and absolutely contradicts what we're talking about with wanting to get green infrastructure into those communities. Now, I know we don't all represent town centre wards. I know we don't all represent overly urban wards. I respect that. But for those of us that do, I think there's an issue there for, well, which is going to win out? And for me, there's a concern here of having a strategy like this that says one thing, and then the local plan pursuing something else. And I'm just wondering whether or not this committee or whoever can help us push back a little bit here, that just going tall or going incredibly dense in the urban area is not going to help this strategy, and it's certainly not going to help the fact that we've declared a climate change emergency.
Well, Chairman, can I answer that? Because I don't see it as a dichotomy. I'm not quite sure what's been suggested in other contexts, because I haven't been there when it's been suggested. But if there is an attempt to replace some of the concrete that is called shops with a retail on exactly the same site, if that's what's being suggested, then it's not reducing green open space at all. But that is not the end of the story. That's only the start of the story, because more residents need more green open space to enjoy. And therefore there is a compromise between how much can be built and how much open space they can have access to. And in that mix, of course, there is a question of evaluating the amount of green open space there is already, that's already enjoyed by current residents, and how much they may be, well, whether there's too much use of it or whatever. Now, all of those are calculations, but it's not a straightforward replace residential with replace retail with residential means bad. No, there may be other reasons why certain people have views on how Basingstoke should be laid out and whether densification is a good or a bad thing, but it's not a straightforward argument. And so I wouldn't want this committee to get tangled up in that at this stage without necessarily knowing the full picture. What we're here to do is to protect the green open space that already exists and consider how it can be enhanced or expanded where there's a need to enhance or expand it. And clearly one of the biggest areas of green open space in the centre of the borough that is closest to the retail area is East Rock Park. There are obviously some others, there's Glebe Park and there's some others besides, but it is East Rock Park. And East Rock Park is being looked at as part of the Basingstoke Natural Environment Management Plan. And its links to Basingview, its links to the urban area to its south, and obviously to the centre of the town centre, and its links across to Black Dam as well. And I mean the residents of Black Dam and the green open space there. So let's see where that emerges and whether that in itself is going to benefit the residents that are there. And whether in due course, once that is enhanced, if that's where we go, whether that is able to cope with what may or may not be planned for the residential heart of Basingstoke before we go down the line of saying, oh, it shouldn't happen. Because I think there's arguments both ways on this.
I kind of with you.
My cabinet view.
I'm kind of with you on that. I don't disagree with what you're saying. I just think that it was presented perhaps in such a way that, you know, and I don't mean just the town centre as the retail area of the town centre, I mean beyond that as well, the suburb that surrounds it, as being intensification means we can cram in more units, and that doesn't get you the green space. But if it's what you say it is in the way you described it, Mark, then yes, I believe that would be very, very good, and I'd welcome that. I'm just not sure that was the way it was communicated thus far. But yeah, let's wait and see then. Let's see what comes of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, does anybody else have any questions on page 12 before we move on? No? Okay, so page 13 or 12B or whatever you want to call it, where we have Project R and Project S. Okay, Tom, do you or Chris want to go and just take us through the woodland management area?
Yes, so obviously a core activity of the team is managing the trees stock that we're responsible for, and obviously we have a primary contractor that does an awful lot of the tree work for us, and they do reuse and recycle any kind of materials that they fell as part, or in terms of the maintenance work that they carry out. So you know that's kind of enshrined in the way that they work. I think the action is quite specific in terms of you know, wood fuel, etc., and you know, so to a certain extent that is achieved through the mechanism I've just described. You you know, we haven't, as alluded here, we haven't explored potentially growing forest just for that purpose. That's an area we haven't touched on. It may well form part, again, we've mentioned this a lot tonight, the East of Basingstoke Natural Environment Management Plan, again, just looking at opportunities. Key theme of that is looking at how we can manage those areas and improve biodiversity and support the sort of climate change work that we're all doing. So again, it was just marked as amber at this point, because it's still work in progress.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, I've got Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. I'm intrigued about this mention of timber. We have a large number of trees that were planted to mark the Queen's Silver Jubilee in 1977 that are now, growing to be a big problem in some of our estates because they were planted very close to houses, not anticipated at the time how big they'd grow, how close they'd get. So while I'm pleased to see that the byproduct of felling some of these trees when they become a hazard, and we have our 5-year rolling review is timber. I'm very intrigued about the idea of having timber as a cash crop in the borough. Those of you who have an interest in history will know that at one point we had a lot more trees across Hampshire. Pamber Forest used to be part of Windsor Forest and it extended to Kingsclear. It was deforested. We had a large number of trees, deciduous trees, felled to make sailing ships in the 18th and 19th centuries. But traditionally, that's come to pass. We now have our sort of expectation of timber is pine forests, places like the Scottish Highlands or Northern Europe, North America. I can't really see the potential of us having timber cash crops in North Hampshire unless we were to plant many square miles of trees, and I'm not altogether sure what type of trees would be most appropriate given our chalky soil. With any light that can be shed on that, I'm all ears.
Chris.
I think in terms of cash crop timber, I think one of the things we need to bear in mind at the minute as well is issues around things like ash dieback, because this is leading to large amounts of trees throughout hardwoods in the country being felled because of the disease, and it is leading to a crash in things like timber prices for those kind of hardwoods. So at the moment, looking at things like timber products has to be looked at in those specific lights with those kind of special factors catered in for, because that will be an ongoing process for say the next 5 to 10 years throughout our area, and will lead to quite a change in the makeup of our woodlands. So
thank you, Chris. Okay, Councillor McCormack, do you have a comeback or a supplementary question? No.
No, I'm fine. I've lowered my hand as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Miller.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Woodland management. Councillor Harvey has already alluded to the fact that some of the urban wards in the town have a lack of canopy. I represent a ward that has probably got an excess of canopy. It's the way that Chinham was developed 40 years ago, and the way that the houses were built. We enjoy a plethora of trees, and generally you can turn around and say, well, aren't you lucky? We're lucky, but a portfolio holder who he left the council some years ago actually put in a 3-year budget line, and I think it was around £800,000 for a 3-year management of the trees in the Basingstoke and Dean district. £800,000 over 3 years doesn't go very far, not in this day and age, but it's the management of the trees. I have a continual problem as so is my fellow councillors, and I don't think I'm alone in that these trees were fine 40 years ago. They've now grown for 40 years. They need to be managed. I know enough about living and growing up in pretty much in the countryside in my time, that you can't just leave a tree to grow. I'm talking about oaks, I'm talking about beech trees, especially when you build a community of 4,500 houses all around them, and we've shoehorned in other little, as everybody's got, you know, there's a new little development here, there's 13 houses here, there's 12 houses there, but we're not getting the trees managed. And this is what this is all about in number R, is woodland management. I think Andy made the point very well about, a bit doubtful if we're going to be getting money back from this, but we have a duty of care to the residents, not only in Chinham, but across the board. If we have our trees that were left there deliberately by the council when they built up these developments, they're due to manage them. We've got the added complication that 3 years ago, 4 years ago, any tree that borders a highway is now the county council's responsibility. You try and get hold of the county council if you've got a problem with a tree against the highway. It's impossible. They'll turn around and say there's no money unless it's going to cause the chance of a death to somebody, then we might react. The system is broken. Unfortunately, we have to accept the fact we have these trees that are growing. And by the way, there's a formula, and I think Chris will back me up on this, that the size of the canopy is the size of the root area. This is why we're very conscious that when canopies start to go close to your house, as they do with the biggest oak in Chinham behind my house, it's on county land, then your root system is starting to approach your house. Now that's a fact of life. So we're not getting that wood management. Now, if you're talking about this, the duty of care is mentioned in here in the final column towards the green infrastructure. Timber felled is used as chipping. Well, that's an outcome when a diseased tree is taken up on the 5-year cycle of the review. They do a great job, by the way. Your contractors are very good at it. But it's piecemeal. It's tiny compared to the number of trees we're talking about. There's something like 80,000 trees in Basingstoke. That's a huge management issue when it comes to woodland, but it's got to be tackled. It's tackled on a daily basis, not suddenly because we've got a green infrastructure strategy. This is an ongoing issue, and it certainly has to be funded, because then the council, if you start getting the invasion of the roots into under people's houses, and don't forget, there's a lot of clay around here, you start getting that substructure being damaged, the council picks up the tab. So you've got a cost benefit analysis to be done here to sort everything out. I treated this as a vehicle to get that message across, because there's a lot more just below that little expression of woodland management. It goes right across the board. It has done, and we've generated a problem for ourselves, but we've got to acknowledge it, and we've then got to address it. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Okay, I'd like to go to Tom for that, please.
So again, we have mentioned it once before. Absolutely take on board what you're saying. That there was obviously a particular strategy to look at some of the trees in established urban areas before, and undertake some corrective works and remove some of the trees, etc. That was as you say, it was a program with a limited time span, etc. So the way that we inspect the trees now, clearly it's on a 5-yearly inspection program, and unless the tree is diseased and it needs work carrying out, I mean, that would be it. We're calling a safety issue and needs to be taken down for that reason, etc. Or again, through some of the work that comes through from individual residents, if there's shading issues and such like, then again we give consideration to those sorts of things. And there's a formal process for residents to go through with the tree panel, with the electric members sitting on on that board, if you like, to make final decisions about whether trees should be felled or not. So yeah, there is a work that's undertaken. I think the tree policy work that's obviously being updated and reviewed will need to feed into this. How do we manage our woodlands, and what are the opportunities? So I think it's an area that we'll have to give more consideration to as part of that tree policy review.
Thanks, Tom. I was aware of the tree policy because the trees outside my house were inspected 5 years ago, and they're due to be re-inspected this year. So I'm looking forward to that, to see how much they've grown and got close to my house. Anyway, let's have a look. If there's no more questions on woodland management, okay, then going on to S, the GI improvements linked to existing work programs and projects. Okay. So, Tom, would you like to take us through the internal work programs?
Sorry. So in terms of this is S, isn't it? Box S.
Yes.
Yeah. So again, this sort of links to the action plan right at the end. Appendix 1, I think, has got more detail about some of the ERS projects, but obviously we've got the priority program, which has been approved in terms of that particular piece of work, and obviously we have progressed with a number of projects despite the restrictions of COVID. So they've been some sites have been delivered. We've already talked an awful lot around the sort of other stuff that goes on through Section 106 improvements, but also in terms of capital projects that have been enhanced, improved some of our open spaces and parks. So, I know the detail's not in here, but obviously we have touched on some of this in terms of earlier conversations.
Okay, does anybody have any questions on this? Councillor Carr, have you got your hand up? No, okay, right, no, just waving a pen. Okay, no, great, okay, wonderful. Okay, let's move on then, over the page. Okay, and on to page 14. Okay. So the Basingstoke Canal route feasibility study. Tom, do you want to lead us into this, or does Councillor Raphael want to jump in?
Yes, I'll jump in. Well, I keep telling you, we weren't a member of any of this until I've got us joined up, and now we are a member of all of this, and we're trying to sort out a route, and they're delighted, we're delighted, and it just takes steady progress. So this is definitely deserves a green, and we're working on it. So there's regular meetings taking place every 4 to 6 weeks with the Basingstoke Canal Society, and we're working through projects. They take a long time. Different people own different things. In the middle of it, the county council's got their bit as well, so it takes a bit of time to sort out that. But I'm hopeful that raising the profile of the route of the canal will be something that will be of benefit to the borough as a whole, and it's certainly, as to answer Councillor McCormack's question, it is being raised within the context of the East of Basingstoke Natural Environment Plan, but the route itself is obviously much longer and greater than that. And of course, we've got sections of the canal with water in. Not many people know that are accessible to the public, which not many people know that. And they've been turned into a nature reserve, and I'm keeping an eye out for whether that's an excuse by other people to do nothing, rather than actually maintain them up to a standard that they were maintained when they were restored some 20-something years ago. They're the sections to the western portal of the Greywell Tunnel. Now, of course, we have one of the, apparently, although I don't know if it's been assessed recently, Chris Slack knows more about this than anybody, we've probably got one of the largest collection of bats in the whole of southern England in the borough. That's if they're coming out that way and not coming out of Greywell, then they're in the neighbouring borough. But so it's always good to talk about bats when they're somewhere else. It's when they're in your own roof that tends to get exciting, and you can't talk about them at all. Otherwise, some nice conservation people want to talk to you. So So yeah, so it's a lot of good work here, and I'm hoping in due course we can celebrate the canal as part of Basingstoke's rich heritage, along with Basing House, which I recently visited again and saw where the canal was within it. And I'm looking forward to telling you more about the East of Basingstoke Natural Environment Management Plan as things to come to and options come to fruition, which is very soon, I believe.
Thank you, Councillor Raphael. Does anybody have any questions on this? No? No? Okay. Let's move on to section U then. Okay, section 106 improvements. Tom, do you want to take us through this?
Yep. So really what we need to do to enhance this is just to make it clear how this interlinks to the table below. So I'm not sure what page it is. I haven't got the printed pack that you've got in front of you, but in terms of Appendix 1, on the second page of Appendix 1, there's a row with landscape schemes completed, and it talks about ERS, it talks about LIF, PIRA, section 106, number of schemes delivered last year and this year. So
sorry, Tom, for members, that's the bottom of page 19.
Thank you.
Just so that members can follow.
So we need clearly the cross-referencing between the table and the supplementary information is something that we'll improve upon for the next iteration of this report. But that's where the more detail can be found in terms of numbers of projects that have been delivered by the team.
Okay, members, do we have any questions on section 106 improvements? No? Okay. I think probably, Tom, a little bit more time will be needed to actually go through the section 106 improvements and also the Appendix 1 maybe. So if anybody does have any questions, I'm sure they will email them through to you. Okay, so can we move on to V then, other partnership projects?
Again, this is almost one of those ones that sort of cuts across a number of the actions that we've already discussed.
Sure.
In terms of engagement with a lot of these groups that are relevant to the open spaces and the assets, if you like, within the borough. So yeah, I don't want to replicate or repeat what we've said previously, but there's obviously an awful lot of ongoing dialogue and engagement with various groups, including the North Wessex Downs AONB, Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, HBIC, there's loads of them, aren't there? The River Loddon Catchment Group, Basingstoke Canal, etc. There's a whole variety of different groups which we are engaging with.
Great. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on section V? No? Okay. Great. Moving on to page 15. Okay. I've still got time for that. Development of the Beeline networks. Tom, do you want to take us through that?
I might defer to Chris because he clearly knows
a
lot more about that one than me, but we touched on it at the beginning.
Yes, it's really following on from what we said before, really. We've got these broad network lines at the minute, but with the involvement of things like BIS within Basingstoke itself, and also things like the Elms payment scheme for farmers on delivery of environmental benefits, and working with the North Wessex Downs and the catchment partnerships and things like this. It's to actually decrease the amount of broad status of these beelines, so they actually start to make some sense with what we were actually delivering within the borough as funding schemes come online for farmers, as we deliver other areas for BIS and things like that. So it's keeping that up to date as well, making sure it reflects adequately what we've got at a certain period of time as well. going forward.
Right, and I'm assuming that the ongoing projects that have not been fully delivered is the reason why the RAG's amber. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean things like Elms, for instance, at the moment are in, it's pilot schemes related to the Environment Bill and going forward. So these things are ongoing in terms of a national status, in terms of, in delivery. So changes for things like how farming, the goods they're paid for and things like that. So the amber colour is as much as our delivery. It's actually where the point of the process is, with other organisations being able to put biodiversity things on the ground.
Right. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on Project W? No. I think, I mean, it was discussed in other areas, so I'm just wondering whether we have covered everything, but just give everybody the opportunity for any questions on that. No. Great. Okay, so just turning over the pages, looking at the index of strategic priorities in the GI strategy. Does anybody have any questions on page 16 and 17? Bearing in mind they are just lists as I understand it. No?
Just an index taken out of the GI strategy.
Exactly.
Just the summary of the 35 strategic objectives.
Yeah, exactly. I was just asking if anybody had any questions on that. Okay. And then moving over to Appendix 1. Okay, which is page 18 for those that have a printed copy, and pages onwards. Do we have any questions on that? Councillor Harvey.
Just to say, in terms of the first page in the middle section there, I was really disappointed to read about the amount of loss of habitat, particularly lowland mixed deciduous woodland -9 hectares, and floodland grazing marsh -13 hectares. I mean, if we're talking about gain and infrastructure protection and green inventory protection, it's just very disappointing to see such an amount of loss of those particular habitats, given I imagine how important they are. I noticed that we gained some in other places and they're important as well, but to lose that amount is pretty disappointing, really. And it's obviously not all in our gift, I'm sure, but nonetheless, it's just disappointing to see that.
Thank you. Chris, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, I can only echo the councillor's remarks. I'd just like to say as well, with some of the just to bear in mind, in some years, some of the losses can be due to some reprofiling on how HPIC actually measure their relative habitats. But certainly in this case, I think there was some relative loss involved. It's something we'll be trying to address going forward with the new structure. Well, it'll be everything really. It'll be climate change, it'll be nitrates, and it will be biodiversity net gain as well. But certainly with climate change and aspects like that, tree cover is going to become a very relevant thing going forward.
If that's the case, Chair, I mean, I know you've not raised this yet. I mean, but if the local plan process is going on over here and we've got the GI structure over here, I just think having some sense of having this back perhaps before March, or back in a timely frame to look at where we've got to, so it does inform the local plan process as well, would be really useful. I mean, this has been really useful this evening. I know we've said about the action plans, the key performance indicators, and linking back to those 35 strategy points in a better way as being a key takeaway from this evening. But could we get something back so that we've got it perhaps before next March, just to have another go at how far the strategy's gone along between now and March to help that local plan process? If that helps you, Mark, as well.
Yeah, Chairman, can I answer that? Because
by all means,
I've had a discussion on that today, in fact. So I'll give you the difficulty and then we'll suggest to you some solutions. EPH is going to get very busy. And I'm told that rather than come back in the December, January time, as we might have done with the annual, there just isn't going to be an EPH committee available to take this probably until March. And if you do the talking you've done previously on the local plan, even that might cause this to go back. So we're looking at a range of options, because I'm all in favour of your scrutiny of this, and I've enjoyed hearing everything you've said tonight. One option is for us to say, well, we'll just reboot rather than saying come back in December, January, we'll come back in the May, June time, and that be 12 months from now, as it were, effectively, so that we just run it on a bit. Another option is to say, well, should we have a map to discuss this, or should we have some sort of meeting where you can all come to, but it's not EPH, but you come if you can, so that you can assess it in addition to what you normally do. Because I just don't think we're going to get it on EPH's agenda like we're doing now. We're certainly not going to get the luxury of a whole evening on it, and you wouldn't have had the luxury of an whole evening if whatever was on the agenda for tonight had stayed on the agenda tonight, but it obviously been shunted off for other reasons, or whatever it was, something to do with the local plan, I suspect. Can we say this? I don't want you to detain too long, because quite frankly, we're there now. We're at the station, and I'd quite like to go and have some supper. But but I would like to hear just a few words from you as to what you might prefer, and then perhaps you could address it to the chairman in due course, and he can come back with some positive suggestions about how we make this work with you over the next few months.
Well, I'd like almost like a map personally. Okay, I think it would be very worthwhile for us to come back on a date that's not on EPH, because as you said, Mark, the EPH calendar is full and creaking. So I think a map would be good. Okay, but I'm open to other suggestions. And Councillor Konesko.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't put my hand up to respond to Councillor Fell's point, although I do actually agree with what you said, Chair, and I would probably favour going down the map route, given, as you say, the schedule for the rest of the municipal year is already looking really busy for us. My question related to the table on the top half of page 20. We talk at the end there about the number of requests for tree works, and we talk about the number of new trees planted. But as far as I can see, we don't say how many of those tree requests were approved, and therefore it's difficult to get an idea of the net increase. I'm hoping it's a net increase rather than a net decrease in the number of trees in the borough. So I was just wondering if I was missing something and that information had been presented somewhere else, or if generally that number wasn't in there, and we couldn't get this idea of the net gain or net reduction in trees in the borough.
Chris, do you want to bring that in? But I'll tell you what, before you actually do come into that, it's 21-27, councillors. What I'd like to do is to, with your agreement, suspend standing orders. Okay, we're almost there. We do just have the work programme to go through. So I would expect to finish probably somewhere between 2:45 and 10 to 10 with your indulgence. Okay, could I have a show of hands, please, for agreement of that? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, so Chris, sorry, if you can come back to an answer to Councillor Konesko's question, that'd be great.
Yes, I've got no specific figures on that. What I'll have to do is go and get a written answer for the councillor from Frank Wright, who's our tree manager, relating to that.
Thank you. Can we leave that in your hands?
Yeah.
That'd be wonderful. Okay. Does anybody have any other questions regarding the Appendix 1? Yes? No? No? Forever hold your peace. Okay. Okay, that's wonderful. Councillor Raffel, thank you very much for your time tonight. along with Tom and Christopher. Okay, I'm sorry that it's taken so long with so many questions, but it's always nice to get the committee's commitment, okay, to this. And as I say, Councillor Raphael, I'd like something like a map, and I think that will be, you know, a fantastic way of moving forward. So thank you very much. If you want to come back very quickly, no, that's great. Okay, so if Christopher, Tom, and Mark turn off their bits, that's great. Okay, Tom, you can leave us if you can hear me. And then what we'll do, does anybody need a 5-minute break, okay, before we go into the work program, or should we just go for it and there we are?
Go for it. Not got much time to do.
All right, okay. I appreciate Andrew McCormick that you're in the office and you want to get home. So if we have a quick look at the work program, okay. The last 2-3 weeks I've been extremely busy with me trying to get everybody into maps, okay, for the local plan. So I do apologise, but if we move on through to the to be decided, which are at the end, okay. We've got the AMR infrastructure funding statement, okay, COVID-19 motion, and the Economic Recovery Board and the Local Enterprise Partnership. I'll be honest with you, members, I haven't done a lot on that because I've been busy trying to make sure that we can fit into the local plan. So with your indulgence, I will keep those on my list of things to do and work through them. There is, you know, in trying to clear out the housing, clear out the work program. Okay, there is something we could possibly do with the housing strategy and allocation, and that is to move that to the scrutiny committee. I've had a word with Councillor Jones, and he is receptive to us moving it. Okay, I would just like, before formally moving that, just like the committee's agreement. So can I have a show of hands? Okay, that will clear one item off. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay, 6. Okay, that's unanimous. Okay, so I will formally thank you. Oh, sorry, Councillor Harvey.
Could we get a standing invitation for members of this committee to attend that meeting so that at least they get a chance to contribute to that particular item on that agenda?
I will put that in the email, but that is in the gift of the chair of scrutiny.
Excuse me, Chair.
Sorry, yeah. Who was that?
There's Paul Miller.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Miller.
Can we do this? Have you taken advice about whether we can do this? Because what we're doing is tripping over the Constitution a bit here about the terms of reference of committees.
I have actually taken advice from that, and I've been told that in this particular case we can do it.
Okay, fine. Because if you look at the terms of reference of committees, I don't think the scrutiny panel, if you look at the Constitution, the scrutiny committee can actually do this. Because it's outside the terms of reference.
The scrutiny can actually do this purely and simply because with the housing strategy and allocation, okay, the report that comes to us is actually about what has happened in the housing strategy and what has happened with the allocation. So it is actually a scrutiny function.
Okay.
Okay, and on then that basis, it can go there.
Maybe it should just have gone to the scrutiny panel anyway, and it should never have appeared on our work program.
Maybe so, but I think in previous years there's been talk about, you know, asking questions about the housing strategy going forward. Okay, so I think
that's the point. Yeah,
exactly. So okay. I think for this 1 year, okay, I'd like to push it to that the housing strategy and allocation to scrutiny, so they can take a good long look at that, okay, and really pull it apart and do a good job on that. Okay, so apart from that, we can see from the dates, okay, I've been trying that we have a local plan update in every single meeting. I have been trying to get an update from Joe Bromley and Ruth O'Megler, okay, to try and put some meat on the bones, because you know, there are so many progress reports. I'd like to know what they actually want to bring to the committee in each meeting. Okay, I appreciate things may slip, but there we go. Okay, but so I'm awaiting that to happen. I would also like to add on one particular item on there, in the fact that we had the housing green conversion motion, which basically I haven't unfortunately done anything about, because I've been busy. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to add that to the bottom of the work program, so we don't actually miss that, because I think it's vitally important that we actually get that, and that will give me something to actually work on in the next couple of weeks. Okay, so that's kind of where I am. So does anybody have any questions on the work program? No? Okay, then what I'd like to do is formally close the meeting. It's 21:35. Okay, and I'd like to wish everybody safe journey home